when we go on pension. So I'm eating that tax now. The problem is when we have policy stances such as the two-pot system. You say now we give you a third so that you can go and buy fat cakes because you are hungry. By the time you retire, there's no money. Absolutely. You'll be fighting over that money with your grandchildren and your children. That's the danger that we have around our kinds of policies that go unchecked and people go and get that money. Now they come and say, we are surprised. It's actually the people who earn less than 20,000 who are taking this money. What did they expect? It was going to be taken. Vultures will come, making sure that for every transaction they get 10, 15 rands and make themselves rich. And those vultures are formal businesses. How do we accept that, CIC, that we have a two-pot system? Instead of confronting our evils, confronting our enemies and saying, we will not take money of pension, we will use the power of aggregation of that money to invest it in order that we create generational value. Now, you see, when we're a country and you don't have a system of planning, you can't go anywhere. The Afrikaners, I've told you, there was a scientist called Smarts, not the right type. My God, I think I'll not sleep tonight. I've said a curse word. This guy, Bale was a scientist for smarts. He created ESCOM. He borrowed 16 million rands from smarts to create ESCOM. Within 5 years, 6 years, he had paid off the debt. He had borrowed from government, from pensions, in order to create ESCOM. He didn't go to the markets. He borrowed from there and then purposed ESCOM to be a provider of low-cost energy for households and industry. That initiative spawned ISCO, spawned the modern Denel, spawned IDC, spawned CSIR. That infrastructure then, with the lack of war, World War, which South Africa was not involved in, positioned SMART in a very strong position to ensure that South Africa is ahead of China, is ahead of everyone else in terms of industrialization. China only woke up in the 90s. And surprise, surprise, by 2023, when we are reeling under severe load shedding, China says, we'll come and help you, South Africa. Now, until we understand the purpose of the capability approach, we are less likely to move, and we haven't understood that to date. Now, this capability approach starts from a perspective of, where is my yes. It starts from achievement. When we talk about achievement, there we are actually talking about one vector of achieved functionings. Are we a functioning society? Or what does a functioning society look like? Define it, characterize it, and then work backwards into a plan where you have to say, how do we create personal preferences, social pressures, and other decision-making mechanisms in order to achieve one vector of achieved functionings? Coming to capabilities, these are vectors of potential functionings, which is your education and everything that should enable society to move better. And then, of course, personal, social, and environmental conversion factors that are derived from vector of goods and services. Those characteristics. What are the goods and services that we should have? Housing, water, sanitation, food, and so on and so on. Once we have identified those, of course, there has to be means of achieving this, the freedom to achieve, and achievement itself. We don't have systems of planning that are this detailed in terms of, design thinking and systems design. If you go to the Minister of Finance and ask, this plan of yours, or this plan of government, how are we sure that it will reduce poverty? They'll clutch at straws. I can tell you that. I was in government. believe you me, there is no system that has future proof. The argument oftentimes is that when we insist on future proof, they'll jump and say there's not always full proof. No one argues that there's full proof. There's never full proof. Full proof is in the past. You'll talk about full proof when you have actually achieved, when you have that vector of achievement. But future proof is design thinking, systems design, where we say these things that we'll all do will make South Africa to grow at 6%, that South Africa will generate this and that and that. I think I'm taking too long now and I have so many slides. But here is where we are now. Here what we are looking at is what we call a demographic transition. Demographic transition occurs when the number of children that are born to a woman of reproductive age, normally 15 to 49 these days, children as young as 10 start bearing children. But let's pretend that that doesn't happen and focus on the 15 to 49, that number keeps on reducing over a period of time. And as it reduces over a period of time, it changes the age pyramid, the age structure. Instead of a very broad age structure, it narrows into almost a box. And in that narrowing of a box, then you have the potential for a demographic dividend, provided you do the right things with the democracy, so that the democracy then pays a dividend into the demography. So democracy has to pay a dividend into demography. It should create those conditions. South Africa, although it's amongst those countries like China, Singapore, although more like Latin America, is far, far, far from ever realizing demographic dividend. Two things. The apartheid regime did a number of things. Creating migration, separating men from women. And of course, under those circumstances, number of children born somewhat get reduced. However, there also is something else in the migration system where a man is away for 12 months and life occurs back at the village and life occurs where the man is. When that happens, you expect children to be born. But no, there are no children. So the staff nurse at the clinic and everyone else provides these things that make sure that children are not born. And it's not the pills, it's not these things that the mother-in-law will see. It's the injection. Now, that has been the main driver of demographic transition amongst the blacks. Amongst whites, it was education in the first instance, and amongst Indians, the same thing. And then all these other things, they had the choice to take a pill or an injection or whatever they wanted to have, or a condom. Amongst blacks, the social structure compelled them to use an injectable. And that led to the transition. And this transition is painful because you have been deprived the children as a, and then you don't even have a demographic dividend afterwards. You pay a double price of cruelty, both for yourself and for your children. Now that cruelty tells you here where China said one-child policy. But with that one-child policy that China prescribed, it grew at the rate of 6.9% per year. South Africa remained at 1%. And therefore, we have actually reduced the number of children that we can give birth to for almost unsavory reasons. And we haven't gotten the benefit of the fewer children that we're giving birth to. This is a disaster of a monumental, in fact, it led to destruction of the South African children. Now, 1994 happened. The promise of the 1994 scenario, Montflair scenarios, were that of the flight of the flamingos. The question asked there was, are the government's policies sustainable? Is transition rapid and decisive? Is a settlement, this thing that's, okay, is a settlement negotiated? Will it be rapid? We ticked all those boxes. And are the government policies sustainable? Now, by sustainability, it meant macroeconomic policies that are spoken by the IMF and the World Bank. We ticked all those boxes. Did we get the promise of the flight of the flamingos, which was inclusive democracy and inclusive growth? The answer is, by 1999, we didn't. So the price for all this was not delivered. Well, we went into government and then we made some changes. Some changes from 2001 to 2007. And we had scenarios, and the one scenario that we actually saw emerging was the Shosholoza scenario, where growth was, employment was growing, but still unemployment high. But there was a lot that happened there that we may need to go back to and say, how do we get there and get the growth of 6%? Gross fixed capital formation as a ratio of the GDP was 25% annually for 5 years. Growth was at 6%. Unemployment dropped from 29% to about 23%. Still high, but a drop nonetheless. Lending was at 15% growth every year. So you could say that the position that the Reserve Bank took then was one of pro-lending, providing finance for many things. But then by 2009, all that had reversed. And of course, we had scenarios, not yet Huru, Nkalakata, and Movango. And indeed, we saw that. I mean, you should go and read the scenarios in government. So where we are now is not because we didn't know that we will be there, but scenarios told us that we'll be here. The only thing was we didn't know who are the actors, but the actions were very clear, crystal clear. We got into the National Development Plan. The National Development Plan is not a plan. It's not quantified. Until you quantify it, it's just a storyline. But we are clinging to it even today. How many years? 14 years after the fact. And we still say, in terms of the National Development Plan, we'll do this. No. It's really irrelevant. It's a nice storyline with interesting targets, but it hardly meets the quality of what is required in a plan. We started working on scenarios around 2016, and we said, well, South Africa has a few paths, Isibujwa, Gwara, and Nailawok. We were clear that we were in a Gwara situation by 2016. We now worked on new scenarios more recently, and I think we are actually deep in the vulture nation. When you see people eating others in Stilfontein, then you are in cannibalism. When you see people dying in Hammanskraal because they have ingested poisoned water, you know. When you see people in Kolobe and young children dying at a nightclub because they don't have facilities, then you know that a vulture nation is nigh. So whatever we have been talking about, from RDP, GIA, Giza, NGP, NDP, 9-point plan that gave birth to 14-point plan, and now ERRP and DDM, master plans, and everything about the noise, hardly cuts it for the plan, because none of this have instruments of future proof. I'll move faster. One of the things that I asked when I was Statistician General was what are the priorities that South Africans have. Access to reliable and water, lack of employment, cost of electricity. Of course, this was done before load shedding. I think if it was run, load shedding would have been up there. But, you know, priority number 15, education. If we have as a country education as priority number 15, then we cannot design systems that will address education. It means that our consultation is very shallow. We don't actually get to the real need that addresses the actual needs. You see, I was in KwaZulu-Natal, and I ran a small survey of 3 schools. And in these schools, what we got was children who were in primary school, who were before grade 8, grade 7. No, they like mathematics. That's their preferred subject. They don't fear it. They say, bring it. I like it. But my goodness me, by the time they go to secondary, they no longer like mathematics. It shifts. You see the pink here. Once they go to grade 8, you can see how the 33% drops to 16%. The president, the minister of education, the MEC of education in the province, the principal, the students, the parents, all argue that my child, I want you to pass matric, leave this mathematics. That's the switch that happens. Until we understand the danger of that. I started with the slide that Ferwood asked. What is the use of teaching Bantu child mathematics when it can't use it in practice? Now you see the president, the minister of education, the MEC of education, the principals in education, the children, the parents, gaining together and saying, I want my child to have that certificate end of the year. What certificate? When 1.2 million children that are born, 1.3 million children that are born, only 250,000 of them will get a decent pass. The rest go to waste. That's what we are producing in South Africa. That's what the factory is doing. And therefore, there cannot be an intergenerational value. Part of the problem is here, where you see the majority of children, 18% of the girls, say they have family responsibilities. They've gotten pregnant against 1.3% of the boys. This is what we are generating, a crisis of significant proportions. Now, what is the family setting? You see, the family setting is a problem. A big one and a big challenge derived from migratory labor systems. As a man, but I'm already above 49 now, it doesn't mean that I still breathe, by the way. On average, a male spends 15 years in relationships. Females, 4 years. In that period, they are with different partners, and children get born. Now, if we don't start looking at these numbers and say, what is it, given where we are? How do we create a caring society? In my culture, which is Sesotho culture, stop asking questions. And these cultures are more needed now than before. Because these cycles that are so disempowering, 4 years against 15 years. And then we come with the question of who gets funded in education. The government says, oh, no, you should take the joint income of the parents. For a man, it will be joint income of 4 years, 3 parents. And he has to go and pay fees in all those. And then when you pursue him, he jumps and says, I'll give you a blue eye. Stop bothering me. Now, when the policy cannot realize that there is a crisis that needs policy intervention well beyond the parents, then you know you have a blind government. Where they say, no, we want joint income. What joint income? When the situation is like this. They have not looked at the figures. The whole thing is I have to be a critique of yourselves, politicians. That the students said fees must fall. They were joint. We needed to follow that movement of students saying fees must fall and support it, regardless of what political party they belong to. Because when you build democracy, it must be anchored on fees must fall, on these kinds of problems that we must understand, so that government must pay for everyone. I made my submission at the High Commission and said, pay for everyone. The national agenda of building a nation is much more important than this nitpicking of saying children of the rich. Besides, you have to pay for everyone, white, black, colored, Indian, all of them. They are there at university at least for 3 years. And if they are black, they have 2 additional years that they'll be at university. And they are the critical mass of the leadership of the future. And the only assignment we have to have is to ask them each year, what society do you want to see? You as students, cohort after cohort. In another 15 years, we'll have solved the problem of nation building in this country, if we do that. Nitpicking on saying we'll pay for these ones and not pay for them. The Afrikaners are going to build their own more new universities, and the national project of nation building will be dead. Now, coming to men and women, or fathers and mothers, 60% of fathers say they are married against 31% of mothers. Now you ask these men, who are you married to? When half of the women say they are married against double the number. This is the crisis that we have to confront and deal with. Here is what the trajectory has been. In 1957, when Verwoerd asked the question, what's the use of teaching Bantu child mathematics? Indians, coloreds, and blacks were all here. But look at what happened. After that point, the Indians actually moved differently. Coloreds and blacks clung together like a bag of, like bananas in the dark. And by grade 10, of course, things happen. But what is more important is really what happens at post-school level. If you speak English like I speak English, I am part of that class there. 30%, it's all white, black, and everyone who speaks English like myself. We are there. If you speak Afrikaans, you see your generational value goes down like that. If you speak Tsvenda, it goes down like that. And of course, if I were to revert to my mother tongue, which is Sesotho, I'll be part of these ones down here, instead of up there where I am. The Statistician General's report says 13% of us who are black are part of that club in terms of expenditure. We are part of that club. 87% of our people are not there. 73% of the whites are in that club. So we cannot outmaneuver them from voting point of view where we are in that club, when they are 73% and we are only 13%. So what do we need to do? Our aim, as I started, is to increase income per capita. And that can go through labor productivity, absorption rate, and terms of trade. Where we are as a country, we are doing very badly on total factor productivity in terms of capital deepening and economics of scale. In terms of participation in the economy by labor, those things are equally bad. And of course, in terms of trade, we are equally bad. So there is no way, as a country, we can have demographic dividend. This dividend is an illusion. We are not going to see it. This is where that dividend gets lost. 1.3 million children are born out here. Up there, 1.3 million children are born. They go through school. Only 740,000 of them will write here. And of those, only 250,000 will get a decent pass. 800,000 get lost every year. And that 800,000 that gets lost is this one that you see here. It is a vortex of disaster. Only a few will go to TVET, and only a few will go to university. That's what's happening, particularly amongst blacks. So this is an accident waiting to happen. When you remove us, the privileged class of blacks, and leave the English white speaking, they run at 70%, 60% instead of 30%. We diluted them. But too few of us, 13%, can't, you know. And then Africans are speaking there, and then, of course, other languages. And by province, because we are performing badly as blacks in education, we drag everybody down through time. So you can see generational value happens when this is on the up. But because, you know, too few blacks want to go there, they want to be part of that white class. Now you can no longer go back home to see your suffering people. They embarrass you, they frustrate you. So it creates tensions amongst black people. So whichever way you look at these things. Now, I've told you this vortex of disaster. This is what happens to them. What happens to that vortex of disaster is that the only time when the one with no schooling sees income is when they are at my age. Of course, because they do go to school and do a few things, they see income. But when they have a degree, they see income much earlier out here. But the majority only see income when they reach 70 years old. Now, that income distribution, because of that, the Gini coefficient amongst blacks, the Gini coefficient amongst blacks, this thing is, you know, the Gini coefficient amongst blacks is the highest, this red one. And if the difference and inequality amongst us is that high, there cannot be peace. There cannot be peace. We'll fight over Mkompoti and Branavale and Tasi. These guys, their Gini coefficient is very low. They can take their whiskey, they can take, you know, different kinds of things. But this inequality amongst blacks portends trouble, portends that we can be bought, we can sell our souls, and we can create divisions. Until we start addressing this, and this is the situation. I was waiting for the Statistician General report of 2024 here. What we are looking at here is, as a proportion of the people who are skilled, what is that proportion for different population groups? Here is the white population. 1994, this is what the proportion was of coloreds and blacks, this blue one. 2016, this is how that proportion changed. You can see that the blacks are stuck and the coloreds, they are stuck. Indians and whites started moving. They moved, and by 2024, I have figures for 2024 here. By 2024, for every black person out here who is skilled in the age group 25 to 24, they reversed from about their share of 17%, which was here, that reversed to 14%. And if you take that person who is 25 to 34, and compare them with the white person who is 35 to 34, you divide 14 into 61. That is almost 5 times growth amongst the white population. You cannot run an economy with this proportion of skill amongst 80%, 90% of the population, and depend on only on the 10%. Now, this is how the GDP has grown. It's been stuck anyway. You can see 4.6, 4.4 over 2021 up to now. Now, the problem is this. In 2008, those who are 15 to 24 who were employed were 1.6 million. There were 1.6 million, those who were 15 to 24 in 2008. Those who were 25 to 34 were 4.8 million. That number reversed by now to only 1 million from the 1.6 and 1.4 million from 1.8 in a growing population. From 1996, from 2001 to 2011, all municipalities had reducing poverty. Between 2011 and 2016, 82 municipalities reversed, which is the third. I'm sure when the Statistician General releases his report, you'll see that almost all municipalities have actually reversed multidimensional poverty. They have become more poor. The deprivation rates on nutrition by poor households and non-poor households, you can see what the deprivation rates are. The blue bars tell that. The only space where the blue bars poor households are better in feeling secure. In feeling secure. They feel secure in their cuckoos. We don't even feel secure in our high walls ourselves here. Now, what are the new tools of power? What are the new instruments of power? We really have to start using multidimensional poverty instruments. I've characterized what is happening in the country. It cannot be reduced to only to growth, GDP growth, or consumer price index. It requires a lot more than that. And that lot more than that is what I am putting here across time. From 2001 to 2016, unemployment as a driver of poverty grew from 32% to 52%. And in the last part of the 5 years, it actually doubled in half the time. This growth here is 12 percentage points against 7 percentage points here. It doubled in half the time. That's a serious acceleration. And education has become number 2. Yet education is priority number 15. Unless we do deeper analysis of the numbers, we'll never understand them. What does that mean? For the youth, education attainment and not in education or employment accounts for 50% of their poverty. Education is tied to employment. Absolutely. So nitpicking on the matter of education is not the right thing to do. Of course, we need to have toilets, we need energy, we need all that. But the core drivers of this are here. A mechanism of prioritization that is different, that gives us that new instrument of power is this one. So when the Minister of Finance provides the results in Parliament, or rather reads his State of the Nation address, you must ask, you want to see this graph in the Orange Book. Not these things, real GDP and the like, which you will find in the Orange Book. You want to say, I want to see what the level of multidimensional poverty will be given the Red Book. In Parliament, these are the kinds of discussions we must have. What we are doing most of the time in Parliament is to talk on inputs instead of talking to impact, so that we can start using new instruments of power that are systems design based and design thinking based. So this is what we like. I don't want to talk about what worked and what didn't work, but it's safe to say Morena Mhlomi was a transformational leader, pursuing peace, productivity, intergenerational value, using integrated reporting. The absence of integrated reporting in government and in the state is a result of absence of new instruments of power and modern instruments of power to manage power. So, one of the things that we do at SSA, as I conclude, is that we provide raw intelligence, financial statistics, labor statistics, census, GDP. That's primary thing. I mean, it's just numbers. But we also process them into instruments of power, such as input-output, supply-use tables, social accounting matrix, and growth accounting framework. That I just showed you. But what happens is that you have to use sound policy making in sound policy. And what needs to be done, in as far as that is concerned, I'm going to where this is. I'll come back to this graph as I conclude these two, but I want to go to the last ones, where as we look at this base information, base intelligence, secondary intelligence, we need modeling capability. And when you model and you use heterodox systems of modeling, this market-based modeling, which say gravitate towards, which say economies gravitate towards equilibrium. And your equilibrium is when you don't have anything and you still are saying, I'm comfortable, I'm in equilibrium. It's wrong. We need heterodox outcomes, which is by how much will poverty be reduced, by what? And for that to happen, you need heterodox systems. You cannot do it with market systems of looking ahead. So as I finalize, I have to come here. South Africa has large shops, medium and small, private service. When you compare South Africa with all these others, you can see a serious concentration. And that concentration is in the whites and not the blacks. 73%, that's where the concentration, 13% is some of us. We are there. But as consumers, not even as producers. The problem of concentration, such as chain stores, is that even if the 13% that are accommodated, which is 2 million households, they are sure that they'll make profit and they don't need anything more. But the power of aggregation of money of 250 of the poor is so huge that it adds to the super profits in that concentration. So whatever we do, if we don't change the value chains, if we are still accommodated as the 13%, it doesn't matter what we do. Intergenerational value is but a dream. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Bros, for such an insightful presentation. It is clear there is a lot that has been shared here today, but what I've taken from this presentation is the issue of education and how we've been controlled through education. Yes, there's a lot that has been presented, but it takes us then back to when Verwoerd really, the reasons for introducing Ibantu education, saying that it is an education that will give a black child blinkers, so that a nurse can only know about the human physiology. A teacher can only know about educating a child. Without having said any, wasting your time, I am now going to take hands, 2 rounds of hands, and then close, and can allow Dr. to answer our questions. Thank you. Hands, please. Yes, the first hand. Number 2. Number 3. Number 4. Only 4 hands, so it's 1, 2, 3, 4. Thank you.
Thank you so much, National Chair, and I do welcome the presentation by the good doctor. My name is Lillian Managa. Doctor, if we didn't have maybe the birth control methods as the country, where do you think we will be today as the country? And what strategies do you think we can implement as the country to achieve democratic dividend and harness the potential of our youthful population? You did present a table. In that table, it was showing that about 1.3 million infants were born. And then out of this 1.3 million, about 740,000 wrote matric. Out of the 740,000, only 250, they managed to get the pass. They got the pass. Currently, we were busy assisting the learners so that they can get admission in the university. We are sitting with the children who are having distinctions in all the subjects, but the students are struggling. So if maybe we were having about 500,000 out of this 1.2 million, do you think as the country we were going to accommodate them in our institutions of higher learning? But maybe the question, as legislators, as the politician, so what can we do? Thank you so much. So maybe lastly, National Chair, when I read the title, State of the South African Economy, I thought maybe, I didn't know whether he's a doctor because he's a statistician or he's an economist. Mina, I don't have a background in economy, but I do understand. I thought maybe he was going to touch something on how to grow the economy. So in my mind, what came was the township economy, but Ukari is not his area. Let me pause here. National Chair, thank you so much.
Thank you. Thank you, National Chair. All protocol observed. I just have two questions for the good doctor. The first one will be based on education. Doc, do you think, my name is Ngatokolanisi. Doc, do you think that the state of education or the education type that we have today in South Africa would or has the potential of changing the state of economy in this country? I'm saying this because we have an education system that is not entirely decolonized, and some of the modules that you find in university actually teach students on how to become employees instead of being the owners of the means of production. The second one is on the basis of labor. We see in the teaching industry, I should call it the education industry, that we have a large number of qualified, quality teachers moving abroad in places such as Japan, China, and so on and so forth. Don't you think that also that plays a part in the appalling state of economy? Because once you lose labor, it means that the state of economy on itself, the cycle has been broken. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Revolution greetings to all the leaders of EFF, starting with the President. Prof, I come from the Bantu education. The higher grade of the Bantu education was far much higher than the current one. In your thinking, what went wrong? Because I did science without the lab, but I could compete with people who are doing science today with all the support they get. What I feel that the education, the current education, is creating so much dependency on support than developing one's mind to think critically. If maybe you can clarify to me what went wrong, or what could be the what went wrong with the education, our education now than before, because it's just producing people who are lazy to think. Secondly, it's the correlation between poverty and more children. You say in China they said 1 child per family, yet the economy has been growing. And this was because the population of China was so much. They couldn't accommodate people, thus they took the decision of one child. I remember during our times it was said that if they could jump at the same time, the whole world will shook. Now, what is the correlation? You go to the informal settlements, there are more children given birth to, yet poverty still reigns. We said during the UDF times when ANC was in exile, we said we do not want more prisons but more schools to be built. We said no shebins, no more shebins in our townships. But I've noticed everywhere I've been to where I'm deployed, where there's poverty, there's lack of resources, people are forever drunk. Forever drunk. They have money to buy beer. Would that be one of the challenges? Maybe we've abandoned the values of what brought us freedom. Should we reconsider? Thanks, Chair.
Thank you, National Chair. Greetings, Commander-in-Chief, officials, CCT, and fighters, and our guests. Mine, Doctor, sorry, is firstly, with the subject of LO, I think perhaps in schools we missed an opportunity, or the Department of Education missed an opportunity to use a subject like LO to offer career guidance. So we avoid the issue of children doing subjects where at the end of the day they get a bachelor pass qualification admission, yet when they go to university they don't qualify to do anything. I'll give you an example. To become accounting at the university, you don't have to necessarily have accounting as a subject in matric. As long as you have mathematics, you do qualify to get into become accounting. Yet having accounting gets to be an advantage for you. So I think with a subject like LO, instead of what is currently being taught in that subject, we missed an opportunity to then introduce career guidance, voter education, patriotism, and really to teach about necessary basic skills that an adult human being will need in life. For example, it's very embarrassing to see an adult not being able to use an ATM. So I think this is where we missed an opportunity. Secondly, the issue of parents getting directly involved with the education of their children. Because these children, these schools, it's the school principals who connive to package the subject in a manner that will make the school receive 100% pass rate. Then we celebrate that the school has received 100% pass rate. But when you check the subjects that are packaged, they chose the simplest subjects: tourism, consumer studies, the simple subjects. You will find that the child is now doing 3 languages and 3 additional subjects, making it the 6th subject that is required to get a matric certificate. But at the end of the day, it's meaningless. How then do we get, especially in our black communities, to get parents to fully participate in the education of their children? I think lastly, I want to ask about the issue of how to preserve VNEC while we strive to be in the bracket of English. Because if you look at our VNEC, it's right at the bottom in terms of achieving and being successful in life. The English bracket is up there, and then VNEC is down there. How then do we balance the two in order to preserve our African languages, vernacular in particular? Because we can't say we're going to just abandon our home languages in pursuit of all of us knowing English, but while we want to achieve, how then do we balance the two and not lose our languages in the process? Thank you very much.
The questions here I see almost suggests that I should start into a new presentation. I'll start with the economic modeling one, because your expectations were for me to talk about economics. I thought that perhaps what we should worry more about are the fundamentals within which economics may actually perform. But now that you have made a provocation in that direction, I'll try and go further in the presentation, just to highlight some of the things that we should actually do in order to deal with our economic situation. I touched a bit about market economics. You see, when Milton Friedman, in around 1975, he wrote the book, Business is for Profit. Margaret Thatcher and Ronald Reagan liked what he wrote. And it meant that the subject economics is reduced to cash. Not anything else, not even money, because money is part of deep economics. When we start studying monetary policy, how do you monetize things too? So it became cash. And that resonated with Thatcher, and that's when Russia started crumbling. Milton Friedman went to see Gorbachev and started poisoning his mind about business is about profit. And everything else, based on that motive for profit, will be sorted out. Bajit, the professor of economics, the Indian guy, I met to see him in Dehradun, and we actually engaged quite extensively. He's just published a book, but also delivers a number of lectures about Abhijit Banerjee, about how poverty has deepened. We know our own South African here, Musk. He has as much as the GDP of this country. 4.3 trillion are in his personal name, which is the GDP of South Africa. How is it that the profit motive can be so strong for people to own whole countries and undermine the system of democracy? It is because we have followed the wrong path. When Milton Friedman went to China and tried to introduce this thing to Deng listened attentively and was almost taking on to what Milton Friedman was talking about. But Friedman remembered the Chinese saying that of an ever-normal granary. The ever-normal granary is about the market, China's special markets. They have their own markets. And central to that is the ever-normal granary, so that nobody gets hungry, despite whatever their circumstances. Use the heavy to shoot at that which is light. It means the commanding heights. And I spent time on Jam Smarts and Bale here, because they used the commanding heights to build infrastructure that was for public good. And instead of exploiting that infrastructure for public good, when we came into power, we decided to privatize a lot of it, and we continue to privatize it. It's not going to be of any value to us when we do that. Dare I say that business in 2020 came to government at the time of COVID and said to government, we can grow the economy at 5%. We can reduce debt to GDP ratio. We can increase the number of jobs and so on and so on. In 2018, at Indula Mete scenarios, we had actually designed modeling that showed that these things can be done. And I'll show you how they can be done. And they can be done on the basis of actually embedding this basic intelligence here, level 1 intelligence, level 2 intelligence, which is the data of the statistician general, by putting a heterodox model on top of them. that looks at multi-sector macroeconomic models, that looks at linked macro education models. So you link everything to everything else, and then you run the models, and they are based on economic laws of motion of economics. So the outcomes are driven by the logic of economics, fundamentally. The result of that, and this is the model, this dynamically integrated model. In fact, the last bit of it that we brought was multidimensional poverty. To answer the question, by how much will multidimensional poverty reduce if you implement these policies? This thing doesn't exist in government at all. You can see that it has final demand blocks. It has, now, I'm trying to look at my cursor, and it's cursing me. Output blocks, labor market blocks. It's 7,000 simultaneous equations that try to interpret the complexity of the economy. The benefit of that is that you get results quick, and then you interrogate the results. And then your policy choices can, and then you improve on those policy choices of future-proof. This system helps you to achieve future-proof. There's none of this in government. We go with back of the envelope and then put files side by side, and we are saying we are planning. If it's not integrated at the data level, forget it, doesn't work. So when we think about the DDM, we march into the districts and ask some questions and say we are implementing DDM. This has national, provincial, district, and municipal models that tell you the impact of what happens at the national level at municipality. Because municipalities have to respond to policy. And then they can work with the IDPs responding to that policy, but making input into the same system. When Motlomi talks about integrated reporting in 1813, before he died in 1813, he hadn't seen a computer, but he could conceive of a system that is integrated. Because if it is not integrated, it can never deliver anything. Now, we put up a 6-pillar policy framework, and that 6-pillar policy looks at macroeconomics, social policy, microeconomic policy, trade and industry, private sector, and provincial growth and development plans. When you run the models, and you look at what they can deliver, and how do we reach 5% growth, it sets out the policies that we have to put in place. And when we have set out those policies under business as usual, we know that we'll only get 0.7% growth. These days, we don't even get 0.7% growth. That will be the contribution of these policies on the business as usual if the fiscal policies are restrained. And then when you go to micro reforms, the micro reforms will add about 0.27 percentage points. And the micro reforms are tabulated here. Those are the policies. Then you go to trade and industry. Trade and industry policies will add 0.38%. And the policies are saying, put 10 billion annually into this from the PIC and so on. Then the next policy is the macro reforms. The macro reforms are significant, and that's where you have to act. Treasury and the Reserve Bank have to be active participants in the economy, not observers that observe inflation targeting. They must be active levers. The METI in Japan, Ministry of Economy, Trade and Industry, when Toyota started, they financed it, and it was the banks that financed it, the central bank, to make it work. It wasn't the Ministry of Industry and Trade going to beg. It was the Ministry of Trade and Industries coming up with the plan, and the financing came from the state, the levers that the Treasury and the Reserve Bank can use. Now, you can see that here we are looking at 1.43 percentage points coming in. And then the social grants. They are not fiscus reducing. They are actually GDP enhancing, although they contribute very little. But they are very important in terms of social cohesion, but also GDP enhancing with 0.5. Now, the private sector, when it sees all this happening, when it sees government as an active player, the private sector finally will come. And indeed, their contribution to the GDP will be 0.79%, following the other things that they will do. The benefits are significant. And therefore, when we have done all that, and then the foreign DFIs, foreign things, will come, and they can come at 0.12%. We have put these things the other way around, by looking at the private sector and looking at foreign direct investment. When we are sitting on the levers of power, new instruments of power, that can make this country grow at 5%. Sequencing is very crucial. So that answers that question of economics. Unfortunately, we are looking the wrong way. We are looking into the wrong book for answers. Now, let me quickly answer the questions and at least give you indeed, our strategies for demographic dividend are wrong. We cannot get it because the way we are training, the way we are teaching, the way we changed and killed teachers' colleges and turned the teaching to your university and the nursing to your university, what happens is these people come and speak English instead of teaching children, or speak English instead of cleaning the floor and making the hospital look good. Those are the problems about the education system that we have. Yes. Now, indeed, of the 1.3 million children that are born, some of them will die, but not so many. But the fact that only 250,000 out of a 1.3 million born actually get a good pass, a pass that takes them far into the world. But when they have to go there, they find that the number of places at the university is only 160,000. Then we have a serious problem. Then in addition to that, they have these complexities of the parenting, where the policy says if the parents meet the basic income that make them pay for unit fees, then the child is left in no man's land or no woman's land. And when we have a problem as significant as that, government has to get a policy position that salvages the children from that situation. So the government has an excuse, says, no, we don't have places. It is the same excuse where we say the economy is growing too slow. At one point, we'll say, let's not make more children. South Africa's growth is 1.3% per annum. It's very small. The number of children that a mother gives birth to is 2.2, 2.3. And that's almost close to replacement. Soon we'll be only at replacement. And once we go into replacement, we have an aging population that has not had the demographic dividend, an aging population that doesn't have young labor to take over, then that is disaster. We are on a precipice of disaster. Indeed, our education should and be such that it changes our economy. Critical thought is important. You see, Milton Friedman removed culture and geography from economy. And once you have stripped economy of culture and geography, you don't have an economy, you have cash. You talk about cash, not an economy. What you need is cultural economic geography. So that culture and language are part and parcel of how we do things, how we understand each other, how we empathize. At the moment, Ubuntu is not anchored in our economic principles at all. It's a language that is foreign to what we actually are doing in reality. Teachers are leaving South Africa. They are, and they will, when conditions are not that conducive. The problem with 1976 is that when students correctly rose, and correctly rose including against Shebini and everything, after that was a serious vacuum. And into that vacuum entered all kinds of things. And that's what we have to reclaim through critical thinking and reclaiming very deliberately what prompted the children to go into strike in 1976, the uprising, and walk backwards and say, what do we need to do in order to reclaim that space? I think, oh, no, I haven't finished. Yes. Well, you know, Lord Malthus talked about poverty and suggested that poverty is self-made because people make more children and then they are in poverty. Karl Marx, in his treatise on Malthus, said, oh my God, this vile clergyman putting the misery that is created by capital at the doorstep of the poor. He cannot be irreverent at all. What we see in poverty-stricken communities is a consequence of the deplorable conditions under which they live. They have no escape. Alcohol may just be one such escape. We really have to say, then what do we do? The problem with the 13%, which is ourselves, is that we either get overwhelmed by this and we run away from the problem and get captured by the 73% who are empowered. The end state of that is surely one where another uprising will happen in this country. And perhaps it will not be like June 76. Remember, it's 40 years. In the 50s, there was such an uprising by students. 76 came, Fees Must Fall came, and the periods of uprising will be shorter cycles. There's no way that this is sustainable. We really have to wake up ourselves as black people, because the aggregate of the 77%, the aggregate demand of that is used to support white business, which depends largely on only 2 million. That 2 million is what they need, essentially. The rest is just super profits, and they don't need to care. And if we don't express the empathy as black people towards our own black people, this thing is not going anywhere. So by embedding culture, and empathy will only come from culture, by embedding culture, embedding our language, ensuring that our language are spoken, we can actually go far. Last slide, I just want to show that there is an interesting slide, just before I go on to that one. The issue is this: developed nations don't borrow from markets. They borrow from their own pensions. We go and borrow from markets. Why do we have to leave our 2 trillion of pensions and then 18 trillion under management at the JSC and go and ask for money from the World Bank? It is because we can't hold ourselves to account, and we say we should borrow from somebody else because we know we'll steal the money when we have borrowed it. Then when we have borrowed it, we'll still have the public to pay for it after we have even stolen that has been borrowed. If we don't confront these realities and then use the 2 trillion of public servants' money to invest in our future and get the Johannesburg Stock Exchange use its 18 trillion, it's number 30 in the world. It's number 18 in the world. Yet it behaves, those countries where stock exchanges are that high have a different economic framework and economic policy. So, finally, I've forgotten what I was going to show, but now it's okay. I've just forgotten, and I think you have given me enough time to talk to ourselves. I'm sure this is not the last, but it should be one of the many interactions that should guide our economic policy. We cannot go on a market economy. We need heterodox economics where people participate, and we use multidimensional poverty as new instruments of power to ensure that we know that the future we talk about is the future that we can achieve. Thank you very much. President, communication is so important. Stand here, not behind.
Once again, thank you very much, Prof. Doc, for the information. We are now going to call our next speaker on media and communications, Lerato Chenkeng, the founder and CEO of Decode Communications. Lerato is the reputation management and crisis communication specialist with a keen interest in how technology disrupts life, work, and play. He is also a media contributor and a freelance columnist who writes for publications including the Sunday Times and City Press. In 2009, he was recognized as one of Mail and Guardian's top 200 young South Africans as a communication strategist. That is our next guest speaker. Thank you. Can you please come forward? Let us give him a round of applause. Thank you.
President of the EFF, Julius Malema, your leadership, and all the fighters in the room. Thank you so much for this opportunity to be able to address you on, the intersection between digital communications and traditional media in the main. And I thought that I should start here. I am one of the lucky South Africans who, in 1998, just after the integration of the former SADF and South African National Defence Force, I got to join the South African Air Force. And, we say, may the souls of the fallen soldiers rest in peace. I'm a father of three. In fact, President, this afternoon we'll be traveling to Cape Town. My daughter is going to UCT to study actuarial science. And I know that the National Chair read the bio, but I thought that one of the important things that I wanted to highlight here was what happened yesterday with the CIC. So there was it yesterday or day before yesterday? There was an article on IOL that claimed that the most followed politician on Twitter is President Cyril Ramaphosa. And all that he had to say was garbage. Right? And I think this pivotal moment talks to even, how things are changing very fast, right? Ordinarily, he had to use his account to write to Twitter. But now we know that the platform, or as it's called now, X, the platform has included what is now called community notes. Very quickly, all of us who knew that he has 4.3 million followers versus the president having 2.97 followers, were able to quickly just say, this is misinformation, right? But here's the trouble. And CIC, I put the blame on your table. Thankfully, I'm a consultant, so I'm not a politician. So there are things that I'm not worried about today. The trouble that then demonstrate how we behave as consumers of content in the media space is that we are easily clickbaited. So if you were to click on that article, the headline was very clear that President Cyril Ramaphosa is actually the most followed government leader, right? That demonstrated that many people only read the post and reacted based on the post. And I guess the most important reflection for us is how many times do actually people respond to snippets and not the context that as an organization we always want to be putting out there. And this, these are just some of the small things that I want to put through. And I know SG, the SG had, in the formal communication, there were 4 key points that were written around, what this provocation should touch on. I summarized it into saying, as an organization, that we have really colored the political space in South Africa, right? We may be, almost we are pre-teen now, if you're just looking at our age, or if you're looking at the EFF's age, right? But the EFF has really colored the political landscape. And I thought that because we have done so many things differently, maybe my provocation should be about how do we think about rethinking, particularly that, the next milestone is the local government elections. I know that, typically it's always good to start where, we just think about concepts. And fortunately, when I'm talking to, a group of politicians who care about context, who care about, words meaning something. In terms of political communication, or at least in terms of where the intersection is, right? Politics, and particularly that we now want to convey our message to South Africans, and for a simple reason, right? Or at least we have a simple goal. I imagine that's the goal, CIC and all the fighters, and I may be wrong. Your website says you have 1 million plus members, right? And I imagine the goal is to ensure that you are able to attract a lot more, right? And that is why it is, in that sense, I say, the challenge of where the EFF is that we are almost stuck in a place where we have done exceptionally well from the brand we've built, right? We are generally a brand that, is boisterous. We are a brand that challenges convention in particular, right? We are a brand that is able to agitate for positive change. In fact, people know that they can come to us when they have a problem at Hoër School, Acacia, or any other Hoër School in the country, right? It talks to the kind of brand we are. But we are almost, seemingly, we seem to be stuck in a mode where we are not realizing that there's a better way of doing things. I thought that, part of the provocations this afternoon, CIC would be also be to look, and fighters to be looking at, we need to reflect on some questions, right? There's context, but the question is always what these things mean, right? While South Africa is as colorful as it is, my little understanding is that while there's communication capacity at headquarters, if I go to my my home province in the northwest, in Taung, the capacity is not as well as it is at national. And this is why we must then start reflecting on this question to say, where the capacity issue versus the effectiveness of the brand messaging, right? The second one really being knowing that, and I know that some of you in the room may disagree with the choice of words, where I say South Africa has a vibrant media landscape, right? I said I'm going to be a little bit provocative. And whether you agree or not, what we then need to be thinking about is that what this phenomenon means to us, right? Of course, is my screen moving? Okay, yes. The other one that I then wanted for us to think about is that all political parties have been reflecting on resources and how limited they are, right? The advantage is that in the time that we are in the digital age, we are therefore armed with, or at least the armament helps us to do a little bit more with less. Allow me to state a little bit of the obvious, and this is really based on my own observations of the EFF, right? One, we've built a very distinct, or the EFF has built a very distinctive brand and recognizable brand identity. You know, you've been able to literally ensure that there's a maintenance of consistent messaging across channels, right? If you look at political parties and how they use it, and we can say this confidently because the reason there was that tweet by the CIC on that garbage, it is because Decode, the agency that I founded, had put out, or at least had put out the 5th South African government leaders on X report, which looks at the government leaders, how they behave, and what kind of messaging they put. So on a normal day-to-day basis, we are observers of communication spaces, digital platforms, particularly communication platforms, and what they mean to they mean to organizations. The third and the most critical thing that the EFF has been able to do is that the EFF has been able to dominate the news and media cycles without being press release heavy, right? And then, of course, then there are a few weaknesses, right, that I've at least identified. One is that we rely a lot on reactive communication. That we are an opposition political party, it is a matter of fact, right? But there's an opportunity, and one of the campaigns that we just did a dipstick into was when you were working on the NHI campaigns, where you're looking at clinics that were going to be pilots for NHI, right? Seemingly, there was a very coherent communication strategy that was ensuring that, one, on the ground, you are able to assess, tell the story, utilize the members to be able to ensure that the messaging goes far and wide. However, if you look across the spectrum and even through the timeline, that is almost the only one outstanding campaign. What does it mean about our capacity to to continue ensuring that what works works for our favor? Stating the not so obvious, one of the things that is really propelling, or at least taking us to where we are, right, are one, urbanization, and these are the things that right? But I thought that reflecting on the numbers help, right, in terms of the number of, in terms of we're seeing a movement from, I see people moving from Taung, where I come from, coming to Gauteng to look for a better living. And I imagine it's similar with you from the villages. Digitization, but importantly, industrialization. And of course, right, some of you may have read, 2 days ago, there was an announcement by Caxton, who are the owners of the Citizen, that by the end of February, Saturday Citizen will be printing its last paper, right? And this is going to be a trend that you are going to see over time, where by the, and I don't want to give it call it a milestone, right? But it's like the likelihood of at least in the next 3 to 5 years, that will actually all our news will be consumed on digital platforms, and we must reflect on what that means. Then there's the unfortunate part of foreign interest in what is South African content, right, or at least South African players. While this may just be a capital thing where, a French company like Canal wants to, acquire MultiChoice and the likes, the question that we must reflect on, and to the point that was raised earlier to Dr. Padi around how do you preserve the mother tongue? And this is how we must then, or at least this is what we must then reflect on in terms of what this takeover means from a language and content point of view, and what our role is going to be. Of course, the biggest and largest media in South Africa, the SABC, has always been behind the curve. Fortunately, they are now catching up with their SABC Plus platform. I know CIC, complaining about its user, it's the user experience and all of that, but numbers don't lie, right? The two biggest stories of this week. One is an artificial intelligence technology by the Chinese called DeepSeek. The difference really between DeepSeek and the two others, ChatGPT which is the most dominant, and Copilot, which is owned by Microsoft, is that they are open access. And open access therefore means that they are literally allowing a lot more people to collaborate on ensuring that this platform's utility is more useful. And I think we need to reflect a little bit on that. The second biggest story is that if you convert according to today's rand rate, Facebook or Meta, the parent company of Facebook, is going to pay Donald Trump close to R500 million for having banned him on these platforms, right? And the question that we've always asked at Decode Fighters has been, one, I am blocked by Dr. Popira Matupa, right? Of course, I call her out and many other politicians out on these platforms, so I guess I deserved it, right? But the question that we should then be asking is, to what extent considering how quickly the technology is evolving and where the communication is moving towards, right, from your typical traditional platforms to digital, should government officials, should public representatives not be using them as platforms for accountability? That's a question. Of course, one of the saddest moments in our country, Dr. Padile Hotla referenced many statistics that talk to the divide, social, economic, cultural, and in many other ways, right? And fortunately for them, and unfortunately for us as South Africans, a UK-based company was able to literally utilize and weaponize these platforms. Sadly, it was the Blue Party that used the instrument of regulation to take them to task to the point where they had to be closed, or at least as a business operating in the jurisdiction in the UK. And the question to you, when we're talking about the issue around the intersection of digital communications and traditional media, is that there's a big role for public relations, particularly that there's a PRISA, which is an industry organization. As things stand, if anyone were to mount a dark web campaign against the EFF, you are not going to even be able to come to take Decode to task. The best thing that you can do is to litigate. And the question is, how much are we advocating for some kind of regulation that ensures that communications companies such as ourselves are accountable, and they are also regulated in the way that, should we go there? Because the biggest challenge with a DeepSeek, or at least the rise of all of these artificial intelligence technologies, is that there are mad scientists who are sitting somewhere who are going to manipulate them for the dark campaigns. What is our recourse when these dark campaigns happen? And we need to think a little bit about that. Jay-Z, the rapper, I've added a line there. He says, men lie, women lie. I added children lie. I have 3 I know. And says, numbers don't lie. I want us to reflect on these numbers. Every year in the beginning of the year, there's an organization called We Are Social. They partner with technology companies such as Meltwater, and they look at all the markets on the continent in terms of internet penetration, internet use, and also social media use, right? And I've then decided to zone in into South Africa. You may be asking, why am I using 2024 stats? It is because while the global report comes out around this time, the country reports only come out later. The South African report will only be available around March, and I think it's a useful tool for not only the communicators, but for all of the fighters in the room to ensure that they look at it. Right? Interestingly, close to 70% of South Africans use the internet to search news. Right? We may be saying that the news, or mainstream media is owned by a white monopoly capital, and we have 1 million members. Our goal is to grow the 1 million. What we now know is that the people that we want to grow, that we want to get, are using these traditional platforms. And I am happy that there was a reverse of the decision that was made not to go to the other media house in Hyde Park. and I saw that things have changed, and I hope that that is something that we are going to continue to take advantage of. That is a good decision, and I think it deserves a round of applause. Close to 50% of South Africans use social media to read the news. And we need to think about that, right? So while we may think that TikTok exists so that people can be telling us, their Bible verses, some of them may be, singing gospel songs, others showing us porn, and the likes, right? Close to 50% of them use it to consume news. And the question may be to myself as a consultant to say, but what does this mean for the EFF, right? It simply means that the decision that the organization took to say, we are going to create our own media platforms, is the one that is going to help you to then be able to generate the kind of content that helps you with narrative shaping, narrative building and shaping. Two, ensuring that you are then able to get to audiences with unmediated content. Because the trouble is that while South Africans, or at least those who are over 16 and 50% of them are using social media, the trouble is that they are then clickbaited. They don't read the full story. They then miss the context, and then they say that the EFF is advocating for foreigners to be coming to South Africa. No matter how many times you repeat the message, you tell them, to understand what the message is. Because South Africans are happy with being clickbaited, that is why the decision to have that platform there is one of the important decisions. How many of us in the room, have mothers who are always sending you long voice notes, and WhatsApp, is death by WhatsApp. So no wonder WhatsApp is the most favorite platform in the country, right? Because even our parents use WhatsApp. They may not be on Facebook, they may not be on TikTok, and don't even have a desire to be on that platform. And interestingly, there are many people who actually think that WhatsApp is not social media. It is important for us, and I think again, the question to yourselves is, what is our responsibility and role to educate South Africans about these platforms, right? One, WhatsApp, is a company that is owned by Meta, and to a great extent, they are then able to multi-cross to various platforms, right? But the biggest thing that they've been able to do has been to use our data to monetize, right? And I guess the question to all of us again is to say, if we were to go to the information regulator today and ask, South Africans think that WhatsApp is not social media. What does it mean from a privacy point of view as far as this platform is concerned? I suspect, like you would know, that ordinarily when you drive into this place here, you're not supposed to be giving, or the security guard is not supposed to be asking you for your driver's license, but rather your identity card, right, as per the information regulator, because there are specific, or at least information, personal information and demographic information that they are looking for. So I'm just saying there are things that we ought to be thinking a little bit about. Looking at the favorite platforms, and again, I'm not necessarily talking about social media. I'm looking at the impact of these technological platforms and what we can do to ensure that they help us. You may have observed that earlier slides were all 2024. This one is 2023. I am juxtaposing the 2 years, 2023 and 2024. I'd like for you to pay attention to TikTok, right? TikTok sitting at about, in terms of growth on year, 17.5, and X at 9.3, right? In 2024, X was the only platform that actually declined in users. Numbers don't lie, right? And when you look at TikTok, it has grown phenomenally, right? And of course, because TikTok has done a few simple things. So if you read the story of ByteDance, one, they have resolved the issue around music rights. So you may have observed, if you are a Facebook user like myself, or you prefer Facebook, you would have posted a video and you would get a notification later to say your video is not playing in one jurisdiction or the other because the music rights are, they don't have the music rights to play that. But TikTok does not have that problem, right? But I guess it's a thing of being able to learn from the current players. If YouTube was a TV channel, it would be the biggest TV station today, right? And the question to the communicators in the room, and not necessarily all the leaders, to what extent do we then use this information to ensure that we get to where we want to be? And the reason I had, started with the political communication element earlier, which in the definition, in part of the definition, right, talks to the importance of dialogue. Why is there a need to dialogue? It is because the people who are using these platforms, who are using these gadgets, they have many, many anxieties, many, many issues, which ordinarily, as a political party, to a great extent, we are able to respond to. And respond to does not necessarily meaning resolve, right? But at least being able to demonstrate the kind of empathy that shows that should you elect us into a party in municipality X, Y, or Z in the 2027 elections, we would be, the kind of party of choice. One of the challenges that the EFF often puts to the media in South Africa is the biasness, right? And the subjectivity. There's the largest PR agency in the world called Edelman. Every year in January, they put up the Edelman Trust Barometer, and they look at 28 markets across the world. South Africa is one of the two African markets, and these are the results when you're looking at South Africa in particular, right? So in terms of, if you're looking at people who are least trusted, government leaders, Ndata Cyril Ramaphosa and his lot, right? Followed by journalists. I'm not here to prove you right. I'm just saying the data says. Right? If you are now looking at another question that was asked around, so among these voices, who are the most divisive? Right? And that's a very important question. So if you think about the Bell Pottinger moment, right? Because they did a simple thing. They came in here, they saw the fissures, they were able to say, we're going to use a strategic communications approach to be able to just make them bigger, right? Again, the journalists are almost in the middle of that, right? I run a PR agency. To a great extent, I depend on journalism, good journalism, and journalists to be able to make the money that we make at Decode, right? But I'm not an advocate for the kind of journalism that is distrusted, right? What this means for all of you in this room, there's an opportunity for us to ensure that we then build on the trust that we've at least been able to in the past, call it 12 years, been able to carve, right? But how does that look, right? One of the asks from the SG's office was that you must also talk about propaganda because it's an important tool, right? It's not a swear word. Us who are in this practice, we know that it's not a swear word. We know that people, frown upon it, but we're like, listen, when called upon and we do it clean, there's the values alignment, it means that, we can literally run a proper campaign. Importantly, right, one of the observations, and I hope that the leader from Johannesburg is not here. EFF Johannesburg, which is one of the accounts that we observe, right, typically does not talk about the issues of the city of Johannesburg. Versus, and I'm not saying he does not raise the issues, versus EFF Johannesburg ground forces. That's a curious thing, right? But you can tell there that seemingly there's a proper, and remember we are outside looking in as Decode. We can already observe that there's a propaganda thing that is happening here. The EFF is in, there's some arrangement, with the city. And the question therefore is, how critical are you in terms of the volume? So clearly, there's been a strategic decision that has been made to say, don't increase the volume here because there's an official account. But this one, because these are the members, you must increase the volume, right? Perhaps what we should be reflecting on in terms of that volume is, what does it mean for a Lorado who's not an EFF member and observing that confusion? Right? It may be a good tactic for us because then it does the thing of balancing the relationship, the political relationship that we have, right, in council. It does the thing of agitating and making sure that it puts up the issues of, the people of Johannesburg. And the advantage is that, which, and I don't know, SG, if the social media policy has been signed already. One of the things that we've also observed is that it looks like there is no framework that then helps in terms of governing how, how far people can go. Social media policies are not meant to be the thing that tell people what not to do, right? But it should be saying there are lines that you don't cross, right? And sadly, that's one of the things that we are also observing. We're also observing with some of the particularly red-branded call it accounts, right? The other interesting thing that we've observed, and again, we're now just looking at defensive strategies, and I mentioned the city of Johannesburg because clearly this is more of a defensive strategy, as it were, right? When you have in the city of Tshwane some people who live in Centurion, Dr. Padile Hotla was showing us the numbers, the literacy levels are relatively higher, and the likelihood is that they articulate them better in English, not that they generally articulate themselves better, but in English, right? When you have a leader who is then above these leaders who are at Centurion, what does it do to the main account? And it goes to that first, remember the first question that we were talking about, capacity versus our ability to use brand messaging, right? So when you have leaders here who are very eloquent about the policies of the EFF, but they are illiterate when it comes to these things, what does it mean for the party messaging? And I think it's another thing that we really need to reflect on, to say, we will not get everyone at the same level, right? But SG, perhaps the question is, do we know what the baseline is, right? Do we know that ordinarily, how of all the leaders in here, you can literally just go into a spreadsheet and say, I can tell you how many people are not on X, or all the leaders here, how many people are not on Facebook. And you can then do a deep dive to say, why are you not on X? Because it is going to be out of that articulate, or at least those answers, you are going to be then able to say, perhaps it's just a matter of capacity or skills development. Or perhaps it's a matter of a paradigm shift, right? And it's an exercise that we then need to be thinking a little bit about, right? I worry about how the EFF membership, and I say membership because that's what we observe in the interwebs, confuse robustness with rudeness. I doubt any one of you in this room believe that the brand of politics of the EFF is that being rude. So pardon me. But and again, that can be a thing of social media policy, SG, right? It's going to be a matter of culture, right? Where when we call people out, we don't have to use their private parts. We don't have to use all the other things, right? And it starts in this room, right? I may not necessarily have seen anyone who, belongs in the leadership structures who behave in that way. And perhaps the question is, when the membership behave that way, what are the mechanisms to call them out and to ensure that they don't represent the brand EFF? Because that is not the brand EFF, at least in my view. Just thinking, and I quickly just want to go to offensive strategies, right? One of the things that the EFF has been able to build over time has been, to be a lot more responsive. In fact, I think about when there was a visit to Mall of Africa, right? A lot of us knew about that from the interwebs, particularly social media, right? And of course, people were trying to play with English to say, no, but you are not here as an MP, Ndade Julius Malema, you can't be doing oversight, right? And the question is, if he's not doing it at Mall of Africa, you who are in the Northwest in Taung, and you know that something like that is happening, where one, you have undocumented foreigners, who are not, or at least the employers are not compliant, or at least it's public knowledge that they are not compliant, or it may not even be public knowledge. It may be information that is shared with you. To what extent are we using a similar kind of tactic to propagate the message? Because if you just put the word simply, propaganda is propagating the message, right? So the challenge is that if the Pan-African Parliament were to decide that, allow me for once to call you Julius Malema. If Parliament decide that, Julius Malema is so annoying, we are going to take him on some study tour for 6 weeks. What does it mean for the message of the EFF for the next 6 weeks? Because it looks like it's hinging on this one political principle. Of course, he's our chief spokesperson. Effective propaganda strategies are not dependent on the one voice, right? Ndade, Dr. Padilo Hotla said the things that you've been saying. All that he did was that he went into academic papers and he just presented all of that. How much of third-party endorsement is the EFF using? Because this was third-party endorsement, right? He may not have used the words white monopoly capital, but he said white monopoly capital, right? So it's how much are we looking outside of us to say, who are the people who are saying the same things that we want to say? They are going to say them differently, but because we are clear, we are sitting at 1 million plus, and we want to move to 2 million. Those people are going to get us closer and quicker to 2 million. And you see how, for me, it's a very simple numbers thing, right? The goal is that we want to grow. The goal is we want to get more people to find affinity with our message. The goal is to ensure that a lot more people put an X next to us in the local government elections, national elections, and the likes, right? An example of an organization that has done what I've been relating to better. Some of you, and you don't have to know Advocate Mdntv, who's the head of the SIU, right? You can tell that if Kaiser Khanyago was not the head of comms there, Ndadole would have run amok there, hey? Like, it's very excitable. When he's in front of the media or in front of mics, he just wants to talk and talk and talk and talk. But then you had a good communication strategist who was able to say, you are going to literally speak at key moments. And observe, every day, our Twitter timelines or our X timelines are littered with updates from SIU. But they are not necessarily always from Advocate Mdntv as the leader of that organization. The simple thing that they have done is to institutionalize the messaging rather than personalizing it. And of course, because we're talking political communications, it's a different kettle of fish, right? People believe in faces. People believe in personalities when it comes to politics. But there's a need for a balance in terms of how we think about, how we do the institution. This is not necessarily for the leaders that are here, but for all of us here, right? Because they do oversight of this, right? Simplify your communication strategy. Don't do this thing of, we have this, and I'm not saying it's important that we look at theory, right? Obsess on answering questions. Who are we talking to, right? What are those people consuming from a content point of view? Because once you know, and the advantage of a DeepSeek, the advantage of a ChatGPT, you are even able to say, we now want to hyper-target because we want to be able to get to a particular locale in Pampierstad in Taung, next to my grandfather's home. While I think that at national the EFF has gotten this right, because my parents live in Garankuwa and have been living in Garankuwa since 1999. Whenever I cross the border, Roslyn, when I drive home from where I live to when I'm at Roslyn, something happens to my radio. It switches to Mzweding FM, right? I hardly ever hear the EFF utilizing this African language station platforms. And the question is, do we, one, see them as relatively invaluable? And I'm not saying that I tune into Mzweding all the time. So it may be that when you're on Mzweding, I'm not tuned in. Right? The question is there data that backs up, that demonstrates that we are utilizing community media to ensure that we're able to quicken this understanding, right? I remember last year when Professor J.J. Taban hosted the CIC at Alex FM, one of the things that he lamented, because before that interview, it was Ndadegwede Mantashe. Ndadegwede Mantashe was going to that station for the first time ever since he was an ANC member in Alex, one of their biggest constituents. And these things, I'm talking to them in the sense that we must never think that we are above certain media platforms. We need to ensure that we do these simple things that are going to help us, to quicken how we tell our brand, or at least our brand story in the main. We've built our own media. We need to optimize on that. And the one way we are going to optimize in that way, Skolise, is that we need to be data-driven, right? The artificial intelligence now helps us to know if Lorado has, I've looked at a gospel song on TikTok, right? All of a sudden, all the content I get is gospel. The question is, how does an organization, an institution like the EFF go to the back end and say, I want access to that data? And you can get access to that data. And then say, you then want to be able to put out messaging to be able to get to, the people that we're looking to get to. And this is where I think that if we consider some of these things, you are going to win at the game of traditional media, because one, papers are shutting down. Two, we now know that journalists, are the second least trusted practitioners or professionals in this space. Gone are the days where, when you are a provincial leader, all that you do is that you are a provincial leader, or a provincial treasurer, you are a provincial treasurer, right? The important thing that we are going to have to do is to ensure that all the leaders of the EFF are Swiss Army knives. At any time you can open a red bottle of wine. At any time you can open a bottle of tuna. And it therefore means that you are not always going to be saying, where are the communicators when a message needs to be put out, right? And that's the kind of rethinking that we need to be looking at. Again, ordinarily we used to do social listening where, there would be a media monitoring agency that helps us with this. Now, with the rise of Deep Six, it means that the information comes to us a lot more quicker, right? But for me, it's not about the utility of the platform. It is what we do with the information that we get from these platforms, right? I've used the example of, or at least of my observation to say, there's a very thin thing there's a thing that I see around, robustness and rudeness. If AI engine tells you that you are observing that rudeness is the thing, how quickly do you correct that thing? And I think that's where the responsiveness from the top leadership needs to come in, right? Where we say, we know the kind of brand of politics we want the EFF to be, right? So these tools ought not just to be because, we are looking at the next shiny things. Takeaways, social media policy. I know that there's one in the making, but the sooner we, get it passed over the line, the better, right? And social media policy, SG, and I will share the Coca-Cola social media policy. Coca-Cola as an old brand, highly capitalized, they have a one-pager social media policy. So we must not complicate these things so that a leader in Taung who may not necessarily be, who will not go through, troves and troves of documents for them to understand what this thing is. Let's simplify it, right? Importantly, right, this, few minutes that I've spent here will never be enough to get into how to do it, because now we're speaking about what to do, right? We then, as you need to get into the how to do it, right? And these are now really going to be an ongoing thing. And whilst Kolise and team have been doing phenomenally well in terms of, ensuring that there's a balance here and there, right? From time to time, continue building your own capacity, just like you've done with the, platforms there, to ensure that if you can in-house the training, that would be something that you are going to save yourself a lot of money, and ensuring that a lot of the people in this room are able to use these platforms. Establishing a rapid response mechanism. I indicated earlier that one of the weaknesses that, in my view, I've observed, and I'm happy to be proven wrong, right, is that we have a very reactive way to communications, right? And rapid response talk to, let me tell you what one of the smart communicators who used to be at the NPA used to do. When a case goes to court when a judgment must be passed, he would write two statements. One that acknowledges the court judgment, and another that celebrates the victory. By the time the judge finishes saying, when he says court adjourned, the statement is out. So you see how simple some of these things can be, not rocket science, right? But it therefore means that, particularly around rapid response, the key thing is anticipation, right? Because our reactiveness, we're always caught flat-footed, like Kaizer Chiefs will be caught tomorrow. It's my team, right? So let us find ways of just, ensuring that we do things a little bit better. I want to go back to those questions that I raised earlier, right? Because if you missed anything and stick to these questions and try to answer them, I suspect, CIC, we're going to find ourselves in a better place when you gather in the next plenum. It may not be everyone, but you're likely to see, a relatively improved change. And I put the sixth question there around hotspots, because one of the things that is brand EFF, there are no holy cows for you. There are no go areas for you, right? But of course, there are places where, when we ask in terms of the hotspots, right, and as we reflect on this question, what should the communication strategy be? Considering that if this hotspot was Jankem Dorp in near town where I live, where I know that the SABC is in Kimberley, right, they are likely not to cover that story, right? But the EFF is likely to then ensure that, a farm attack in Jankem is going to get the kind of, call it relevance and publicity. What is it going to do for that community and getting us from 1 million plus to a few more? Let me end with this. I thought, it was meant to play on here. You remember this ad, ne? All of you are old enough to remember this ad. It's the Molom Khobowam ad. If all that you did was to sit here, enjoy the chat and clap and do the Molom Khobowam with the phone in your mouth, it means that we didn't do enough. Thank you so much. I appreciate it.
Thank you very much. That was such a that is what is called constructive criticism. And then in the EFF, we do welcome that, because it will make us grow. And what I like about your presentation is the fact that you are not only criticizing us, you are giving us solutions. And thank you for that. Are there any hands? Any questions? 1, 2, 3, 4. Any other hand? 4, 5. Got Dr. Mdntv, thank you. There's another one, 6. Okay, we've got 6 hands. Let's go.
No, thank you very much, National Chair. My name is Mazwi Blose. Yeah, the presentation is welcome, very educational and all of that. I think out of everything that the speaker had said, we just disagree on the issue of Kaizer Chiefs for tomorrow. But then we'll deal with it at that time. Look, I think maybe I want to start off where you started, with that article of IOL, which has now been deleted. Because there's an observation that I think I have made on social media. And Commissar Snaotambo once articulated this, to say some of these dead media, especially online media publications, they want to ride on the strong presence of the EFF on social media. So they deliberately go on social media and mislead in an attempt that the EFF must come and defend itself. So if you read that article, you can see that the person who wrote it was deliberate. Because the article does not say what is, or the heading does not say what is in the article. So they knew exactly what they were doing, and they got their reaction. So I want to check from you to say, how then do we handle such situations? Because we also have a responsibility to defend the organization against such misleading informations. And there is a lot about that. This was just one incident around the president yesterday. And also, I think this will have to, it's a criticism that I also think it's valid. Our non-presence in local media stations, especially radio stations. I know because I used to run communications in KZN. And I think maybe this will be for the leadership, maybe internally, to say we might need to find a way to capacitate provinces so that they mirror what national is doing. Because if you look at our communications at a national level, our provinces and regions are still a bit far in order for them to match that capacity. So that is very welcome. That observation is true. I just wanted to make that. And then maybe finally, I mean, if you look at social media, there is that, because we're an organization and we are, grounded on the ground to go door to door and speak to our people. But social media also has a real, membership or people that are actually on there. What then can we do to then get this strong presence that we have as an organization on social media, to then get these people who are constantly on the phone, that's who are engaging on them, to actually be voters of the EFF, to be members of the EFF? Because if you look at the campaign of Donald Trump, 60-70% of it was run on social media, and it was effective. How can we then make social media not just as a platform to communicate, but also as a platform to build the organization and get voters? Thank you very much.
Thank you. Let me take this opportunity, National Chair, to pass my greetings to the Commander-in-Chief and the officials and fellow fighters. My name is Mowan Khotadze. Firstly, let us welcome the presentation. It was quite educational for us. We've learned a lot from the presentation. And we also take the criticism. It was very necessary, and there are some things when you were presenting, one reflect on where I'm coming from, and you realize actually we are not taking advantage of the social media platform enough. At the national level, we are doing very good with the social media. In particular, the Twitter account, it's very, very, very good. But maybe my worry to Fighters, that has always been an issue, is that on Twitter, we are very, very, very active. But the reality is that the young people that were targeting from the rural areas, you are likely to find them on Facebook. Like they get Facebook more than Twitter. Even leaders here, we can queue here and say, let's see your TikTok account. How many times have you tweeted? Even leadership does not even tweet because it's not user friendly to a certain extent, which suggests that we must intensify our presence on Facebook and even TikTok, because that is very easy to post on daily basis and everything. That's the observation that I have made. But the other observation when the presenter was presenting, which is worrying me as we are moving into the fourth industrial revolution and whatnot, lately you go to councils, the sittings are on Zoom or Teams. And when you start raising those issues, they realize this one of the EFF is coming with problems. They just forever mute you or remove you. You try to rejoin, then they do. How do we, in the process of taking advantage of that, but also there are those disadvantages where debates are stifled and all. How do we find a recourse? What are some of the strategies that we can use to ensure that whatever that we want to communicate with our people, how are we able to resolve that? But my last question is that this one is a question, the other ones were a comment. Between Twitter, Facebook, and TikTok, I'll only speak of that because WhatsApp, we all have it. Where do we find young people in their big numbers? Because that is, the young people are our constituents, says the EFF. We need to know, where do we find them? Where do we access them? In terms when you're doing your research and stuff, where do we find young people in their large numbers? Thank you very much.
Thanks, Chair. Greetings to the President of the EFF and the officials. My question will be very short, and I will try to be brief. But first of all, let me acknowledge that the presentation was indeed stimulating intellectually and inviting critical thinking. I just want an issue. Okay. No, I just want an observation of someone outside politics to try to advise or have an opinion on the impact of a effective PR exercise and also a not effective one. Whether does it have a real impact on generating or attracting supporters, even voters, and also on the negative side, does it have a serious impact to a point that you may end up losing supporters by having a wrong media strategy or communication strategy or even PR exercise? But lastly, the question that also relates to what I have been saying above, the effectiveness. Okay, the effectiveness of a propaganda in an organization, because it's one of the also interesting issue, the one of propaganda. For example, I have a view or a belief that there are parties that were formed specifically to twist the messaging of the EFF, which other people believe that they might have attracted voters specifically by just twisting the messaging of the EFF. The two parties, the one that was even calling Mabahambe, and I think the other one was also focusing more on the issue of foreigners, which we as members of the EFF would believe strongly that the message of the position of the EFF, for example, on the foreigners or the so-called foreigners is very clear, the policy is very clear, and we agree all with it. But there are those people who twist it, and I think ordinary people have a different view on that. I just want you to get a bit in depth on that issue, especially in relation to the propaganda machinery. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Chair. and greetings to the Commander-in-Chief and to our commissars. Let me first of all thank you for, I think, an excellent contribution to how we look at social media. My concerns are the following. As the EFF, obviously we need to defend ourselves. And we've been in a particularly complex environment the last while of having to defend ourselves. But how do we balance between, on the one hand, defense and reaction to negative attacks on us, and doing it in a way that we actually end up promoting those negative messages? I think if we could sit down this afternoon and do an analysis, we will find several examples of how that has been happening also during the last while. So how do we manage that balance? The second issue that I want to raise is how we interact between the various social media platforms. Because obviously, every one of those social media platforms have their own kind of style and manner in which you communicate. When you're on X, it's different from TikTok. It's different from Facebook. And some of us seem to be experts, but we don't go to TikTok, we don't utilize Facebook. And we should do that kind of cross communication on the platforms in order to be able to amplify our message. And I also think we need to do that with, for lack of a better word, we can call the traditional media. Because there are instances that we can achieve an objective by getting the message out on the various social media platforms, and then it gets amplified further on the traditional media. And the last issue I wanted to raise, and this is a different play from my side on the issue of numbers don't lie. Yes, that's true, in the context that you used it. But one of the problems that we do face, for instance, on X and Facebook, is that there are certain words that trigger algorithms that exclude reach. And I saw recently that Elon Musk said, yes, I will promote freedom of speech, but I will not allow freedom of reach. Now, this is a serious problem, because this issue of the triggering of those algorithms to prevent reach is impacting on us as the economic freedom fighters very badly. Because our politics touches on some of those issues that these big international social media platforms have clearly identified that they do not want to promote. I can give you an example. I run an X space twice a week. If I do an X space on apartheid Israel, the advertising that I do hardly reach the number of people that I would expect from other X spaces that apparently don't trigger their reaction. How do we find ways and strategies to get our reach expanded and prevent this problem? Because for me, and with this I want to conclude, for me that is censorship. And therefore, for those who say that Elon Musk is someone who should be lauded for freedom of speech, the same for also his friend, President Trump, are wrong. Because they just use the most recent technologies and abilities to still circumvent our ability to communicate. Thank you.
Thank you. Greetings to the leadership. Welcome the presentation but there is something that I wanted to touch on. The first one, it's partially covered by the previous speaker. It's on data sovereignty when it comes to data mining. Because that thing of POPIA Act is not applying to the Americans. You search for a car on Google, and when you enter Facebook, you get ads of people who are selling cars. Then you ask yourself, where did Facebook get the data that I'm looking for a car? So it means they stole data from Google. So then there's no policy in terms of protecting our data. Now, you have Elon Musk, who is politically involved. So through data mining, that man knows that this South African favor this political party, and this is how he's going to vote. So through that data, they can use that data to campaign directly to individuals that they know that these ones are decided, they are not decided. They know they have that data with them through data mining. You see, I saw something very bad when Telkom was selling its tower businesses. And instead of preserving it and venture into data center business, not so long ago, Microsoft had a problem and we couldn't run government because our emails were not moving, because we don't have our own data centers. You'll find that the emails that we're sending to each other here, we are using clouds of Americans. So I was on the data sovereignty. It goes even to the SABC Plus, because you will find that SABC do not have its own data centers to host that app of theirs. That's why sometimes it buffer and do all those things it does. Now, I'll go to, when they write, they say TikTok is number 4. Number 1 is Facebook, followed by YouTube, but TikTok is number 4. Something that is not real. Currently, TikTok is number 1. Why I'm saying that? You can't go into any social media platform and not find TikTok video. So TikTok, it's got power to branch from itself and send the message to all platforms. And the other thing is that TikTok do not have robots. You know your Facebook, it's full of robots. If you advertise, you will see that at the end of the day, they use robots. The same thing with Twitter, they use robots. But this is where I'm going. I think you can assist going to that. Do you think it's safe for us not to follow China route? Because from the 33 biggest social medias, 9 are from China, and 21 is from USA. And the 4th one, which is TikTok, is from China. Because Americans can close us down at any given moment. Aren't we supposed to be working on having our own social media platforms that we can use? Because relying on their Facebook, relying on their TikTok, at some point it will backfire. When it comes to China, China doesn't rely at all on Facebook, on Gmail. They rely on their own that one, WeChat, owned by Tencent. It is doing everything and is bigger than your WhatsApp and everything. Chinese are living their lives without any dependence on USA. So don't you think, Ori, one of the things that we should have been doing as South Africans is to own our own social media platform? Lastly, it was okay, thanks.
No, thank you very much, National Chair. Good afternoon to the President and the officials. I just have one question. Okay, first, let's welcome the presentation. Very thought-provoking. I didn't even blink an eye because of a shock. The way that you are brutally honest. One thing I wanted to ask, I got two issues that I need to raise. One is, what's your analysis in terms, because EFF is in government, what's your critique on that? Are we showcasing in terms of what we're doing, and be brutally honest, and then say to us, what can we do to improve? And then the second one will be to, maybe with all said and done, and you presented us with this critique, do you have a way forward in terms of how can we have this, the path of really maybe improving in terms of our communication and the messaging? Because we know that when we're on the social media, how irritating as it is when you write something, you like foreigners, you are like this, always being rubbished all the time. How can we turn this corner and ensure that we are effective communicators and we're able to really change this public opinion? Because it looks as if now the public opinion is really, in terms of social media, is dealing at this point in time. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much, National Chair, and thank you for all the questions. So, Manzini, the issue about the article, right? And again, like you, I believe that IOL knew what they were doing. But in my view, I don't blame the journalist. And this comes to how you and I understand the workings of the newsroom, right? And a journalist is going to write an article, and the editor is going to decide, and depending if it's the online editor, they're going to decide where this article is going to sit, right? Somebody may decide that it's actually going to go on print. So journalists don't arbitrarily decide on where the article is going to be, right? Even with headlines, editors decide on headlines. But in this case, in my view, the social media manager of IOL, because that's the one who put up, because you see the difference between the two is that the post says something completely different to what the article is saying, because they want to clickbait us into reading the article. And all that thing needed to do was the word that the CIC used, which then got a lot of people saying, but this is not true, right? So I'm saying, while there's the thing around journalism and journalists, I think that we must also be critical in that way, thinking about the process and what it may mean, so that we don't paint everyone with the same brush, right? And on the issue around community radio stations, and this is where I don't want to even leave it to community radio stations. Let's call it community media, right? And I'm not putting you on the spot, and it's a rhetorical question. How many of you in the room in the last month has written a letter to the editor? Right? That is one of the ways where we are going to be able to ensure that, in a very simple way, we start this simple campaign. So if we have this NHI campaign that we're running, then we know, and here's the advantage. Previously, There used to be parameters on the letters of the editor because it was going to, a newspaper that has centimeter columns, right? So you could only write 150 words. But now you can write almost an entire thesis, right? And the point that I'm making, and I guess addressing the other thing that you raised, Dr. Chwab, to say, these are the things that it's not a one thing, right, or the other. We need multiple platforms to ensure that it's about how do we repeat the messages in different platforms, right? You currently in Gauteng have at least around 7 newspapers, and I know that Pretoria News is integrated into the Star, right? But the letters email to the Star and and Pretoria News are different email addresses. How many letters did you write to those newspapers recently, right? To your point around it, people are, the public opinion, and when was the last time there was an opinion piece by any one of you in the newspapers, right? So we need a multi-pronged strategy because remember, Fighter Carl raises this thing around, but there's this thing around gatekeeping of keywords and the likes, right? It can only happen so much because sometimes they recognize your account, but when it's Times Live that is putting up that article, people are then going to read that article. So you see how our multi-pronged approach strategy is going to then ensure that it's about the message and not obsessing about the utility of this one platform, right? Then there's the issue on Facebook versus X, right? Comms must never be about platforms, but about messages and audiences. We are very clear about what we want to do as the EFF. 1 million plus, ensure that we get more votes. Therefore, it means that the platform is a conduit, right? And I think if we can change our paradigm in that way, we are likely not to obsess on, I'm comfortable on Facebook. There are more young people on Facebook, right? It's going to be what is the utility of X? Utility of X, it's newsy. Ordinarily, when there's a court case of Senzo Mewa going on, all newsrooms are giving you live updates on there. When Mbenenge's case is on, they're giving you live updates on there, right? Why are they not doing it on Facebook? Because the algorithm of Facebook does not work that way, right? So asking the organization to say, but why are we not using Facebook? We're asking the wrong question, right? Is to say, are we optimizing on the use of X? Are we optimizing on the use of on the use of Facebook? Are we optimizing on the use of Threads, right? And then there was another question around, the effectiveness of PR, right? And again, I can tell you now, and I admit guilt, professionals like myself, we have done public relations disservice, right? Because we've pigeonholed public relations to publicity, right? So when we've received end media, we think that now we can go home, we've done our work, right? And there's a lot more to that. In fact, the work that you do on the ground has a lot more to do with public relations more than anything, because there's a chap, I just forget his name. He asked the question, what if public relations or PR stood for people and relationships, right? You have these online relationships, but you also have these relationships on the ground. It's about how you are now going to ensure that, you use public relations to enable to get you, at least convert. There was a question around, the trouble with, and we've worked with a political party that is in the Northern Cape. You can imagine the Northern Cape, there are only 13 people there. Almost all of them are not on X, right? Did I hata konse? I askis. But anyway, so the simplest thing they were asking was to say, we are seeing that there's a big move towards X, but our people are not on X, right? And again, to that thing to say, the trouble is that we obsess with what is new and shiny. If the CIC has 4.3 million followers on X, we think that that is the benchmark, we must all move there, right? If the people in the Northern Cape are on Facebook, we must stick to Facebook. But here was the other trick that even converted some of the people. Somebody was asking to say, how do you convert some of these followers, right? We did training for the health communicators in Gauteng, and we did an audit of the health facilities. The question I asked, and I did tell you that my parents live in Garangua, have been for the, since 1989. If you are Dr. George Mkari Hospital, and simple Google search tells you that close to 99% of the people that live in Garangua are Batswana, why do you insist always communicating in English? Right? So maybe answering that question again to say, how do we preserve our languages? Perhaps we're also the enemy. Right? Because you have an opportunity, people ask you a question, somebody asks you a question in Setswana, you then choose to respond to that to that question in English. Right? So there's a mindset shift that is also required in how we apply ourselves on these platforms. The fighter at the back asked the question around China. I'm not going to do what the mayor of the city of Tshwane did yesterday when asked about the defense force issue. I am just a communication strategist. I have no view at this juncture on that matter. And lastly, I want to couple what Dr. Ngini was asking with what Fighter Carl was talking about. We are the product. Elon Musk, when he sees you, all that he sees are dollar signs, right? That is why one of the first things he did when he came in with that kitchen sink in that office, he said, we are doing away with this thing that people who have social credibility, they can actually be verified. He said, all of you are going to pay for that verification. So we are the product, right? And because we are the product, they will always find ways of saying, we've recognized that your Twitter Spaces has been attracting people, but you are not upgrading from blue verification to gold verification. We want you to upgrade because they will always communicate the benefits to you to say, oh, by the way, your reach is going to be more, right? So they want to monetize with you. To an extent, you can't take away the politics out of it, right? But to a great extent, that is why he's as liquid as he is as a business person. Lastly, Dr. Ngini, the question around what you should do, I leave it to the SG to say. It's not a question to be answered here because this was just an hour session. It needs a proper workshop where we are now able to engage and interact and we can share a little bit more. National Chair, thank you so much. So I've asked the National Chair to remind you of my name. My name is Lorato Tsinkeng, and I'm just an ordinary young man from Tau, Ke a leboga.
Once again, thank you very much for the information and the advice. You've given us food for thought. We are now going to move to the next item. Our next speaker will speak on leadership strategies. I think she is well known, Mbokodo, the former Vice Chancellor of UCT. And if I can read a profile, it will take us the whole day. So I'm just going to give you snippets. In fact, qualifications are as follows. Sorry. Technology is dealing with me.
it's much better to ask DeepSeek. Yes, you can just ask DeepSeek. You should check what DeepSeek says about you. I asked DeepSeek and then I asked ChatGPT to see who's got it right. So Google might give you a limited view, so better DeepSeek. You know, if I were a politician, I'd begin by extending my revolutionary greetings to the CIC and the entire leadership present here today, and I would invoke the indomitable spirit of the original Viervogel and say, Viva! And the undying spirit of Winnie Mandela, Viva! 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 The undying spirit of Winnie Madikizela Mandela, Viva! Viva! But of course, I'm not a politician. And because I'm not a politician, and contrary to colonial settler expectations, I have no desire to be one. I will simply say, with all protocol observed, ladies and gentlemen, President Julius Malema, all gender-conforming individuals, Dumelang, Tobela, Sanbonani, Molweni. Thank you very much for inviting me to this conference. I mean, Tata, SG. I've been sitting there and I thought SG said to me 11 o'clock. You should have seen how I mean, for the first time today, CIC, I drove at 100. With you. So I flew because I thought it's 11. But how great it is to be here on time. 11 o'clock I was at the door, but to be here in time and sit here and listen to the CIC's, at least part of the CIC's input, and Ntatele Hotla, and also Lorato. I mean, very instructive. I sat there and I'm learning. It felt like I'm in a lecture hall. So thank you very much for the opportunity. Before I continue with what I was invited here to do, let me just say to you, by the way, I'm talking from my phone, and I prepared a written speech because I don't want to go over time. I do have the gift of the gab, and I can speak forever. All right, so I'm going to try to keep to the time, I hope. And so I'll be reading from my phone, also so that I don't forget. The SG gave me strict instructions. But before I continue with what I was invited here to say, I must extend my heartfelt congratulations to the newly elected leadership in this room. You took over an organization that I personally got to know as extremely organized. One of the leaders outside, as I was coming in, said to me, "Is it the first time you're attending an EFF event?" And I said, no. I was there at the 10th year anniversary. And what a pleasure it was to attend the 10th birthday celebrations at FNB Stadium. And I attended with my son. We were both absolutely impressed at how well organized the entire event was. I mean, we went there very early because we didn't want to stand in queues, we didn't want to, but I mean, we just went through very quickly. And of course, my son stayed behind for the after party and he was amazed. Just last month, I returned to the same stadium, again with my son, the same son, for the Chris Brown concert, of course, hello. And we were at a VIP lounge, or the so-called VIP section. I had bought the top one. But despite the hype and the money spent, we both agreed that the EFF event far surpassed the concerting organization. Far, by far. By far. I mean, in both events, I was VIP. On one I paid, in the other I didn't pay. And I promise you, it doesn't even come close. So you, as the new leadership, are inheriting an expectation of excellence. You have a big task. You have a big task of ensuring that this movement remains as organized as it was, or at least as we who are outside know it to be. I'm intentionally avoiding to say more organized because I don't know what you'd have to do to surpass that 10th birthday celebration standard that I saw on that day. But more than just being organized, you have the responsibility of keeping this organization relevant and on the ground until it is time to hand it over to the next leadership in the next 5 years. Time and again, we have seen the EFF being first in line of defense whenever the dignity of a black person was under threat. I mean, it's interesting, even members of other parties have come to trust the EFF and they say, I'm going to tell the EFF, I'm like, why are you not telling your party? And this person says, but I know they won't do anything. Only the EFF can do something. And then I was like, why don't you just join the EFF then? What are you doing there? But that is a heavy responsibility. And I hope that even as obstacles come, even as opposition intensifies, even as exhaustion threatens, you will not tire. Because what you have done and what you are doing and what you are called to do is bigger than any one individual sitting in this room today. You have reshaped the socio-political trajectory of this country in favor of the black child. I don't care who says what. I don't have to be a member. But that's true. That is true. Now, without further ado, let me get to the reason why I'm here. The academic in me was tempted to start the discussion on leadership by discussing the difference between leaders and managers. But for the sake of time, I will highlight critical points that leadership and management are fundamentally different concepts. And we must never conflate them. Leaders are born, I believe, and of course, they can be made too. But managers are always made. Managers are always made. Leadership is not a title. In my view, it is a burden. It is a commitment, and indeed a battlefield. Managers have strict working hours, overtime, and can even write an email signature saying that they don't open their inboxes on weekends or after 7, but leaders don't have the luxury to do that. You can be woken at 2 a.m. and be told a student at a private res is suicidal. A manager can easily say, well, they're in a private res, so none of my business. Or, excuse me, that's above my pay grade, so none of my problem. I won't get involved. And that would be understandable if you're a manager. But a leader knows and understands that leadership is a burden. So they know that it's not about whether an issue is under their purview or whether it's under their constituency or within their pay grade. What matters is that there is an emergency that calls upon you to wake up and intervene in one way or another. Some people are going to join the EFF because you intervened and they are your neighbor and there was someone breaking in and you intervened. And from that day, the whole family is going to join. Leadership requires decisive action, a sense of duty, and the ability to tackle crises because the burden demands it, not because the role defines it. This is the distinction that we must recognize, particularly in a world where many people hold positions that demand leadership, but all they offer is management. You know, there are so many people who have a leadership position, but all they offer is management. Today, we have many people, even heads of states, who function as managers. And dare I say, good managers sometimes. But who occupy positions that require leadership. So they are there, but they have no moral conviction to lead. Of course, in the EFF, I know people are never parachuted into positions of leadership, at least at an organizational level from me as an outsider looking. The people are never parachuted. It is your leadership outside the position that got you to the leadership position you occupy today. And that's how it should be. However, once one enters into formal leadership, there are things that you must know, that you must understand, that you must accept and internalize. And I will discuss 6 of them. The first one is that there is no such thing as a leader in your own right. Leadership is not a personal ambition. It is a mandate bestowed upon you by the movement and for the movement, not for yourself. So you are no leader in your own right. It doesn't matter how gifted you are, but you are no leader in your own right, but in the movement's right. And the effectiveness of your leadership will be measured by the success of the movement you lead. Your individuality ceases and collective responsibility takes charge. But at the same time, accountability remains individualized. Did you see that? So it's different. You know, accountability is individualized, but responsibility is not. The organization moves as a collective unit. But when failure arises, accountability does not dissolve into the collective. It must be traced back to those who held the responsibility to act but failed to deliver. Leadership does not allow for deflection. Yes, you are part of a leadership structure, but your accountability is yours alone. The second thing is that leadership is no privilege. It is a burden, as I said. It's a burden that you have willingly chosen to carry when you accepted that nomination in December. Nobody forced you. You accepted the nomination. And now that you have made that choice, you must carry the burden with pride. And thirdly, as newly elected members, you must start with the end in mind. You cannot lead aimlessly. You cannot be reactionary and respond only to crises as they arise. You must define the legacy you wish to leave behind. The success of your leadership will not be measured only by how well you executed your daily duties, but by whether or not you have built something that outlives your term and strengthens the foundation of this movement for generations to come. When one steps into a leadership role, be it in politics, in business, or in academia, it often comes with some form of upward mobility. Maybe you now earn a bigger salary, or maybe you now earn a salary. Maybe you didn't earn a salary before. Maybe now you have greater influence, or perhaps a bigger office. Well, maybe now you attract more people who want to come to you because they think you are the girl or the boy with the ball. Whatever the case may be, something has changed. Once you get the leadership position, something changes. But real leadership demands that you remain authentic. And that's the fourth thing. You've got to remain authentic. Leadership demands that you remain rooted in the cause that elevated you in the first place. Often people forget the cause that elevated them in the first place. Of course, one of the most difficult dilemmas, especially for black leaders, is how to remain authentic while operating in spaces that demand conformity. And conformity comes in 2 ways, but both of them require you to change. On the one hand, conforming can be a serious challenge, like being expected to speak in monotone or wear clothes that are seen as professional or by those who colonized us, like, this is not how people at your level, how VCs dress up, or how VCs wear their hair, or braid your hair a certain way and avoid afros because they're a little bit controversial. You won't believe that my hair was a point of contestation when I worked down in the Cape. But the list goes on. I know it can be difficult for some to resist conforming to those expectations. So you will see them go out of their way. You see people going out of their way to dilute themselves, to fit in. But trust me, it is very easy not to conform to all that. All that Eurocentric professionalism nonsense, especially with social media giving us the platform to express ourselves, and organizations like the EFF available to come to our rescue, because we are black people, and so there's no point to be apologetic. Your short, kinky hair is absolutely legit. The more dangerous and far more seductive form of conformity is the one that offers comfort, prestige, and personal benefit. You know, the spoils that come with the position. It is far more difficult for people, especially black people, to resist, precisely because the spoils rewards compliance. When I became VC of UCT, and I saw that 2 million rand was budgeted for my inauguration, I asked myself, why are we spending so much money? Where are the decolonization people? You talk about decolonizing higher education, curriculum. Nobody talks about decolonizing the executive and ways of being, doing, and seeing as an executive. Everybody wants to have an inauguration. And I said, why should I have this? And I was told, this is the way it is done. And it's the way it's supposed to be done from time immemorial. And I was asked to write a motivation as to why I don't want to have it. Of course I did. I was expected to accept the nonsensical justification that it's tradition because the event was in my honor. So I was supposed to be impressed. And I said, this is absolutely un-African. In fact, it is absolute nonsense. How could I, as a black mother, in good conscience, waste millions on a party when the lives of hundreds of students are on pause, they've completed, but they can't graduate because they owe the university. Some of them 10,000 rand, some of them 20, some of them 100. And I'm going to have a party for more than 2 million. It doesn't make sense. But of course, no one in the country asks that question when inaugurations are held. Why? Because it's time to buy a new dress. And of course, when I said to that I don't want to have an inauguration, one member of council said, but it is an opportunity to buy a new dress. I said, I buy a new dress damn every day. Need no inauguration for the new dress. So I decided that we use the money to rescue the students who can graduate, settle their fees so that they can graduate. And they said, but during the inauguration, there are other formalities we do. The chancellor has to put the gown on you and you go to sign a book. And I said, when those students that we've rescued graduate, I will sign the book and Gracia Machel must come and put the gown on me. And I will be the guest speaker on the graduation ceremony for those students. In that case, of course, conforming may be easier and more convenient. But leadership demands that you don't do something simply because that's how it has always been done. Ask why it's done that way. The same principle applies to flying business class with university money, having bodyguards, a chef, and many other things. I'm sure you know I rejected all of them. I refused to have a driver, to have a bodyguard, even to fly business class. People who reported to me were not so impressed because if I don't fly business class, how can they? But I don't need business class to feel important or to show that I'm important. I'm important, and I know I'm fabulous. Business class is not going to add anything. But what I'm saying is, remain authentic. You know who you are. The world, the African family that I'm coming from, says you don't spend money of the university that way when the university is struggling with finances and students are saying, imagine, Going to the US, 169,000 rands on business class to New York. And it's more than fees for 1 year with rest for one student. Imagine. I mean, how many times do I go to the US? How many students could I cover for the damn whole year? So I said, no, I'm not doing it. And I'm not saying leaders must not accept the spoils or the benefits, but I'm saying don't accept them simply because everyone else before you or your counterparts in other institutions, parties, or countries accepted them. And here's the thing, I mean, we would go to a meeting somewhere on the continent, all the vice chancellors of this country, and they all fly business class. And so they all come with chauffeurs and E-classes and their drivers, right? I would ask for a lift from them. I mean, of course, I would be coming from Cape Town. But we get into the flight, and the air hostesses say, they all stop at business, and I go to economy. But nobody wants to hear anything from them. Everybody wants to know what I am thinking. And that's more important than being seen to be important. So you must accept the spoils or the benefits because you know you need them. The spoils are comfortable. But I look forward to a day where many of our politicians can decline the spoils. To accept the spoils. Particularly given the funding crisis in our universities. We must separate between necessity and entitlement. If we don't examine what those who colonize us called tradition or convention, we will just keep repeating old mistakes. And I really want to challenge us. Next time we talk about decolonization, it's not just the curricula or ways of teaching, it's the executive as well. Ways of managing, ways of leading. I mean, when you get into the office, you find things, and they are colonial. You find traditions, ways of being seen, and they are colonial. But they are not challenged because black people want to keep them sacred, because just in case I get in there one day myself. If we don't examine what those who colonize us call tradition or convention, we will just keep repeating the same mistakes. Leadership requires interrogation. As a leader, every decision you make must be subjected to moral scrutiny. Leadership demands that you stand firm in your principles, that you make decisions based on what is right rather than what is popular or convenient, or what the organization stands for. You've got to stand for it, irrespective of who stands with you or not. Just because people have been wearing suits and glamorous dresses in parliament for hundreds of years does not mean you can't go there with your overalls and gumboots, and the EFF has proven that to us. People used to babara mapepe, to parliament, and EFF has debunked all of that. Your leadership should not change you into someone detached from the struggles of the people you represent. Instead, it should deepen your commitment to them. If your decisions, individually or collectively, do not prioritize the needs of the most marginalized, then you would not be serving your purpose. You would not be leading, you would be assimilating into the same system, the same systems that have historically excluded us. Now, coming to my fifth point, as leaders, you must have a cause. Something you believe in. Something you believe in so much that you would rather walk into fire than betray it. If you do not stand for something, you will fall for anything. You must commit to your cause and stand your ground in protecting it, regardless of any form of pressure. I, for one, have been very passionate about young people and their development. I believe in young people and am willing to go all out to protect them. That's not to say they are clean, they are perfect, blah, blah, no. So when I started VC, I'm like, in my tenure, remember that was 2018 July, right? And that's the year that the exam was written on the rugby field because Fees Must Fall was still on. And I said, in my tenure, I will never call police or private security. And my executive said, hello, remember that I hadn't appointed these executives. I found them there, many of them, right? And they said, but why? What are we going to do? And I said, we've got to engage. We've got to engage. And of course, there are going to be protests, right? But the reason I don't want to do that is because I don't want to criminalize students. You're 19, 20. You know, when you have a protest about something small as this, and you call private security or police, hey, the thing increases, it gets this big. Because either somebody's going to get arrested, or students are going to fight with private security, there's going to be injuries, and now some people must be prosecuted, some people are going to end with criminal cases on their records. And then they can't be lawyers, they can't get this or that. They did that when they were 21. When we could have solved the problem differently. And indeed, in all the 4.5 years I was there, I didn't call private security or police. But of course, 5 days after I left, the students were bloody shambaked by police. Good for them. They didn't even say goodbye when I left. I'm just being cheeky, man. I'm just being cheeky. The Sihle is here, so Sihle is now. So, I believe in young people, and I'm willing to go all out to protect them, even to that extent. In one of the protests of the students, and I digress, we had Senate, and this professor says, there's a student who stopped some students. They were supposed to come in and whatever. I said, okay, did they beat them? Did they get harmed? Did they get... No, but this is not right. People are watching. Disrepute to the university. I said, okay. Let's talk about bringing disrepute to the university. If we're going to charge students for that, then, excuse me, I want us to charge the professor who wrote The Fall of UCT, because that is disrepute to the university. And that's what I get asked about when I speak overseas. And we stop. Now, so the progress and the growth of young people is a cause for which I'm prepared to die if I were to call Mandela. I donated 20% of my monthly salary when I was VC towards their education. I didn't have to. I didn't have to. From the first month as VC up to the last month, where I got a salary as a VC, 20% went to student financial aid from my salary. But of course, Ajahn Paswan will not tell you. And I did that not because I had excess or money in excess, but because I genuinely believe in young people's development. And I know, of course, it was for scholarship, and that money, I said, only for colored and black African students. Yeah. And I called it the Mamkheti Pakeng Scholarship. And of course, some people want to raise an issue about Mamkheti Pakeng. Hey, it's my damn money. You don't ask Ernest Oppenheimer when he calls it an Oppenheimer Scholarship. I chose not to buy shoes, but to take it to there. And then, of course, I'm saying preference is this. And so, you call me a narcissist for calling a scholarship that I contribute 20% of my salary to? Please, go ahead. Now, the money was deducted right up to the end. Even when they frustrated me, I still continued to donate. Because my commitment to young people's development went beyond my emotions. And by the way, the money is still there. So the scholarship is still there. You know, waiting for the people who are problematic, who are preventing me from allocating the money. But anyway, we'll talk about one day why people do this separately. In 2021, I did an interview with David Mashabela, and after the interview, he showed me around his studios, and I saw McGee's recording studio, and I jumped onto the chair, and they took me a picture, and I sent to my children as a joke, and I decided some weeks or months later to put it on Twitter. And boom, there was pandemonium. I'm sure some of you will remember when I trended for McGee's picture on McGee's studio. It was all over social media, and of course I was still VC, and it was all over the university. People said McGee was misogynist, and said his platform disrespected women, and so on and so forth. They threw all forms of insult at me, and it got to the powers that be at the university, and because it was just a picture, I was now being ordered to explain myself, even though it was just a picture. I was required to distance myself from the platform, to publicly apologize for the harm my tweet has caused. I'm sure you remember, I used to do so many apologies. Like fellow South Africans, here I am again. You know? Because I'm just unconventional. I was just authentic, right? Fellow South Africans, I have sinned. I took a picture at McGee's studio. Actually, people thought I went to McGee. I hadn't gone yet. And of course I said, excuse me. I mean, if any of you has no fault, please, let's see who's got no fault. All of you make mistakes, and these are young people. McGee and Saul, like you, are human. And even worse, they are young. They are bound to make mistakes. And our collective responsibility as adults, I said to them, is to educate them when they make mistakes and not to cancel them. I mean, frankly speaking, we can talk another time. I don't believe in cancel culture. It cancels black people only, never cancels white people. So I have a problem with the culture, cancel culture that does that. Despite their imperfections, these young men have their best, in my view, they have the best interviews in the game. They employ many young people and they inspire even more. And so you expect me to overlook all the positive things they've done and cancel them simply because Twitter said so? And I said, count me out. I will never participate in a destruction of a young black potential to appease any mob or to appease someone who promises favor. And that's how you should feel when you're committed to a cause. You should be willing to go all the way. So I was let off scot-free after I argued with my line managers. And I took it back. I took the fight back to Twitter because it was going on. And I penned an entire thread addressing this nonsensical cancel culture. Some of you might remember, you might have engaged, and you might have said things to me. Don't worry, I don't remember faces, you know. I still go on, like, if you've been VC like me, I don't keep grudges, I keep going. Life goes on. But here's the thing. Someone who's now a deputy minister, Nongeba Mtlauli, I think, came in and said she agreed with me that cancel culture was problematic, but she said it does not apply when it comes to McGee because the platform is deliberately vile, she used, I'm quoting her, disrespectful and regressive, and even went on to say I was disingenuous for defending it. And of course it was a one-on-one until 12 midnight. And I remember someone saying to her, it's 12 midnight, you better remove this comment that you made because it's really shabby. When people wake up, they mustn't see her, you know. Of course, I gave her a beautiful lecture that I will not repeat here. But fast forward 2 years later, McGee's platform is flourishing and everyone is going there to be interviewed. Even ANC officials are going there. They are queuing up to go there. I'm sure Nonga herself is waiting to be interviewed because she's a politician. She will jump if she was invited to be interviewed. So, unlike my picture, I had taken a picture. They are going to be interviewed and they sit there for an hour. And Nongeba and the likes are suddenly mute. The idea that it doesn't apply to McGee anymore is gone. So if I took the easy route and canceled those young men when everyone around expected me to, What would have happened? I mean, I don't know. But what I'm saying is that don't just stop doing things because people outside what you stand for as the leadership thinks that's not right, that's not on, that's not how it should be done. You are here for a cause. You defend the cause, whatever it takes. The cause, you defend it. So I'm glad I was guided by my strong passion for young people and resisted following the wind. And fortunately, history proved me right. Of course, I have countless more examples in leadership, especially when it comes to my other important course, which I took to UCT as my vision, excellence, transformation, and sustainability. Of course, transformation was heavily contested when I got there. There were many who were so intimidated just by the word. And I think some are still. As if the inclusion of black people in leadership meant the compromise of standards. They held their racist beliefs that despicable, soulless, and cold-blooded racists like Janu Zwalus continue to proudly hold today, that excellence and transformation are mutually exclusive. Of course, I seriously opposed that notion and insisted that excellence without transformation would never be sustainable. I will maintain that if you only drive excellence for its own sake and there's no transformation, the excellence will always be disrupted. But at the same time, if we drive transformation without excellence, then it will lack integrity. So I was committed to the transformation course. I remain so, but certainly not at the expense of excellence. At one point, when we were recruiting a new CFO, the selection team came back to me and said they could not find a qualified black candidate or black candidates for the position, so they advised me that the acting CFO, who is a white man and was not even a CA at the time, or well, still not a CA, should be appointed as the CFO because he's been there for a long time, he's always acted. And I said, there's absolutely no way. I was committed that finance, HR, research must be led by black people, capable black people. And of course, I did win that after 4.5 years, that they were led by good people. So I said, there's no way, and I would personally find one for you. So I picked up the phone, and within no time, I had found an excellent black and highly qualified candidate. They interviewed him with their preferred white candidate, and the black candidate was unmatched in every which way. There are many more appointments. There are many more appointment processes that unfolded in the same manner. And it's looking at key appointments, HR, finance, and research. But what I want you to take from this, and by the way, the CFO is still there. You can check him out. What I want you to take from this is that it is important to have a cause that guides your leadership, be it transformation, be it a united Africa, be it nationalization of mines, be expropriation of land without compensation, whatever it is, make sure that once you believe in that cause, you are willing to die defending it, no matter how much fire is thrown at you. A leader does not retreat. A leader does not retreat. Leadership is a sacrifice, Bagaitsu. Stand your ground, and history will prove you right. Everyone sitting here today is united behind the EFF 7 cardinal pillars. Or at the very least, you are supposed to. These pillars are not coming out of the blue. They are the ideological foundation upon which this movement stands for. Now, leadership within any organization must be grounded in unity in pursuit of your cause. Internally, within the movement, you must be brutally honest with one another. There must be open discussion, hard conversations, and a culture of accountability. Your meeting rooms must be spaces where ideas are contested, where weaknesses are confronted, and there's collective wisdom that is sharpened. That is how movements sharpen themselves, how they refine their strategies, and how they ensure longevity. However, externally, you must remain united. And frankly speaking, I mean, you are the CCT. There are people below you. You got to teach them the same thing. Outside, we've got to be united. You know, Lorato said content is king and context is God. Context is important. So you must recognize the context of your leadership. It's a political context. It's a political contest. You want to win elections. You want to win members. The people below you need to know that. It doesn't matter how angry, how unsatisfied, how whatever. Discipline. Discipline. No matter what, outside, we are united. Organizations are not crumbled often by poor policies, but they are crumbled by fractured leadership, by internal battles being waged in the public eye. This is where leadership discipline is tested. If you believe in the cause of the EFF, if you understand the gravity of the responsibility that comes with leading a movement of this magnitude, then you must know that a leader who does not protect the movement is a liability to the movement. Simple. It's simple. It does not mean that leadership is above critique. Actually, far from it. Leadership must be criticized for the movement to grow, but critique must be constructive, strategic, and contained within the house of leadership. When disagreements or disrespect spills into the public discourse, they do not serve the cause. They do not serve the movement. They serve the enemy. And often people do them to serve themselves, because it feels good on Twitter when you do that. But it doesn't serve the cause, and it serves the enemy. Let me tell you, that's what the Blue Party wants. Now, I know what I'm about to say may be controversial, but I will say it anyway, because this is the truth. The leadership demands the courage to speak the truth. And you know, this party has shown that courage to speak the truth, even when it is uncomfortable. The credibility of any organization is dependent on the strength of its leader. If your leader is weak, the organization is going to be weak. So you need your leader to be strong, because the organization becomes strong. They are the organization. Doesn't matter what you say. Doesn't matter what you... Of course you must contribute. That's why you are in this leadership team. You know? That's why you're in this leadership team. The idea that, no, that sentence came with me, or Dineo said, no. So childish. You are in the leadership team to contribute. There is no organization. There is no organization where the leader writes all the documents, prepares all the submissions, writes all the... It doesn't exist. It doesn't exist. Not just the leader, but not one person does all of that. Ideas are co-constructed. When we come to a workshop, we are deciding about the future of the organization. We discuss whatever, and we talk, and then you come with a word. Oh, it didn't come out of the blue. It's because of our contribution, as we are discussing. You just know better English. And so you coin the words. So in fact, it's childish for anyone to say, yeah, you know, workshop ela network you know, bengiphethe. So you strengthen the leader. In fact, you say, we are led. We are led. For me, that's mature leadership. As I said, the credibility of any organization depends on the strength of your leader. And the strength of the leader doesn't just come from the air, we also endow them with it. Of course, leaders are born, as I said, they've got, but we endow them with more of it. Whether we like it or not, the leader is the face of the movement. The leader is the first line of attack. He or she is the primary target of external forces, and as such, his or her weaknesses, perceived or real, reflects directly on the strength of the organization itself. And because they're the leader, I mean, when you're a leader, you get criticized for everything. I mean, the first critique that came when I became VC was that I showed much cleavage. I was, what cleavage? I don't even have one. I was shocked. I was like, what? You'll be surprised. Like her earrings are too big. Like, what? But the leader will be criticized for what they wear, what they say, where they go, who they hang out with, blah, blah, blah. Things that have got nothing to do with what you stand for as the organization. Because they are the primary target of external forces. And so, it's their weaknesses that will be targeted. Or their weaknesses, perceived or real, will reflect directly on the strength of the organization itself. Again, it does not mean you must worship the leader. No, a leader must be held accountable to the collective, must be questioned respectfully, must be challenged when necessary, but this accountability must be internal, disciplined, and never weaponized against the movement itself. Let me present a simple analogy to cement this idea. Let's say economic freedom is your main cause. Of course it is, right? Okay. I'm going to say, let's say. So, we will say it is your ultimate destination, economic freedom. So think of the organization as the car that is transporting you to that destination, and the leader as the driver of the vehicle taking you to that destination. And you all are in the car, you trust